Last smile of the season, you think?
I certainly hope so.
Mr. Deering.
Hey Steve, how are you?
With us.
Doing good, thanks.
So some of the, yeah, it's fun. My blood pumped up a little bit in a good way. After teaching the first graders today, it's kind of nice.
First graders.
Yeah.
Hey Teddy.
I love
How are you?
little guys. Little guys and girls.
Legs.
Nominated one of them for student of the week.
I'm trying not to.
No, I nominated one today. So I take nominations throughout the week.
It's been a common occurrence during the 16 years I've been sitting at this
Essentially kids
desk,
that are
you
going
know,
above and
particularly the
beyond
people
for
who
being
do the
safe, kind, and
suit
responsible.
jacket, shirt, tie, shorts, sandals.
Classmates, always listen to directions, always went above and beyond. So,
Practically. And Lord only knows what you have in your cup.
get a little, certificate. Get a letter stating.
I'll just say it's pink and it tastes delicious.
Ooh.
And
Yeah.
then also get a bumper sticker you might notice around the
No
community.
money, tangible for them, that's more for
Gotta come out
everybody
of
else. Pardon?
budget item. Had a bunch of
We're
states.
all here. We're all in our places, bright shiny faces.
My elementary
Since
school
the
music teacher.
day we started our day.
This is
I lost a little bit of weight, so you might be able to get, look at that.
That's why they put it in the elementary school.
Oh, I said I did. I'm not saying you. I've been like triple my steps being at the school.
She sent me home with my first recorder.
It is kind
I
of.
made sure that was my last recorder.
It's only gonna get better.
Was she not inclined to music or
Weather.
didn't feel your talent was being expressed?
Yes, no, she felt it was a different venue than my talents were meant for. No, my family's very
You
like,
should try act.
Next week?
I mean, we're heading into
we're
spring.
so great in the background of Annie.
Might be June by then, but we'll get
No, my
there.
family's very like, half of my family has, myself included, has absolutely no musical talent. And then my grandfather has like this kind of swear. He never did theater at all until he was in his 60s, and then he started doing it so he could do it with me.
Yeah.
And he walks into his first ever theater audition and assumes he's gonna like get a back.
I called Kyle twice,
Be able to walk around with
Did
me.
you?
Yeah, he does not pick up.
It's like, how am I supposed to remember? It was very good.
That's cute.
All right,
Go for it.
we ready to roll?
Ready to go.
Okay. So it is 6:00 PM and I'll call this meeting, a regular meeting of the Barre City Council to order on Tuesday, April 2nd at 6 PM. Councilors present tonight include Councilor Deering, Councilor Shambell, Councilor Booton, Councilor Watzak, Councilor Stockville, and Councilor Lozon. We're joined by City Managers Shirley Castro and Clerk Treasurer Dawes. The agenda is available online and in the back of the room. This meeting has been publicly posted, is being recorded, and subject to Vermont's open meeting law and the council's rules of procedure, which are available online. Welcome everyone who's joining us either here in the room or online. If you're joining us online, please keep in mind that we offer online access as a convenience, and we will continue the meeting if any technical difficulties occur. I'd ask that you stay muted and raise your hand or signal if you'd like to speak and be recognized. I will ask that you speak into the microphone if you're here in the room and state your name for the record. I'll call on speakers in order, allowing people who haven't spoken yet to speak first and limiting time if necessary to get to our agenda tonight. If you have any questions about process or procedure, please ask and we will get it sorted. And thanks to everyone in advance for participating in a civil way. With that, that takes us to item 2, adjustments to the agenda. City Council, are there any adjustments to the agenda? Or Manager Shirley Castro?
not for me.
City Council? Okay. I had a couple just because I didn't see this final version. I thought that moving up the item 8G, the congressionally directed spending projects is really part of the housing discussion, so moving that as item 3. Also, the planning commission discussion is related to housing projects, so moving that to B4. I didn't get a memo in for the intermunicipal water and wastewater agreements, just because I've learned that there's more to it than I first thought, but I thought it'd be helpful also if the manager provided us the rate study contract that the council authorized and has been signed, as well as the intermunicipal service agreement as background for that. And again, the point of that agenda item is that to look at capital transfers into the water wastewater enterprise so that the costs are borne equally among the rate payers for generalized benefits, not necessarily localized benefits within a municipality. And then I think that
I'm sorry,
is
man,
it
is that
for
item
me.
coming off the agenda then?
Off the agenda, and yeah, so
What is that, H?
H.
Thank you.
And given that the budget conversation could be impacted by these housing proposals, the ARPA projects, as well as the charter changes, which would change staffing of the treasurer position, I thought it'd be best if we move those to after the budget discussion to after those discussions. So moving that to following item E, the charter changes. Are there
Yeah, I'm sorry, which,
the budget,
which charter change would affect the budget?
the treasurer
Oh, I don't.
Well, it
think
wouldn't go
would
into
affect the
effect for
budget.
25.
for 25? Okay, so, well, at any rate, the other items after, well, it could then happen after item C, if that's better. All right, and with that, that takes us to visitors and communications. Are there any items that people would like to speak to that are not on tonight's agenda? All right, hearing and seeing none, that takes us to our consent agenda. We have approval of the minutes, the regular city council meeting of Tuesday, March 26th, the warrants of the week of April 3rd, 24. Do we have any licenses? or
Yep,
permits?
I've got one entertainment license application from Jonathan Williams for a political rally in Courier Park on Saturday, May 11, from 12 to 1. Has all the appropriate department approvals, so it's just included on the consent agenda unless someone wants to pull it off.
Okay. And we have authorization of the manager to execute contracts for, is it BD? Is that how
Yeah.
you say it? BD Roofing, Contractor LLC, and the ratification of the council approval to accept the Rainbow Bridge Community Center petition signatures with the March 5th date at the top. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? The ayes have it, the motion carries. That takes us to item 5, the clerk treasurer report.
Yeah, just a few things. We're coming up on the deadline for nominating petitions, which is next Monday, the 8th. The 5 p.m. Statutorily, I'm required to keep the office open until 5 o'clock. That does also happen to be the date of the solar eclipse, and my office will be open until 5 o'clock, but I put something out on Front Porch Forum last night, and I will continue to remind people that Merchants Row is going to be closed for the eclipse block party starting at noon, from noon to 5 on Monday, and downtown has the potential to be fairly busy that day. So I encourage people, if they have their petitions already, to bring them in to me before then, but we will be here. I will be here on Monday until 5, as is required by statute. So you can come in, just plan accordingly coming into the city. So information is available on the election section of the city website, listing the offices that are up for election. And there are blank nominating petition and blank consent forms. And a reminder that you need 30 signatures of registered voters to submit a petition. Speaking of petitions, yesterday was the deadline for funding request petitions, and Rainbow Bridge did drop their petitions off yesterday. I have confirmed 623 signatures. They needed at least 615 based on the 10% of our current voter checklist. That includes 90 that were signatures on the original March dated petitions that council said would be accepted in the spirit in which the signatures were collected. And then the balance were on petitions with the May date. So they will be placed on the ballot for their funding request of $3,000. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that, two more things. One, we do still have some solar eclipse glasses available in the clerk's office. We are giving them out to Berry City residents, first come, first serve, for free. So swing by or call to see if we still have some. As of the last time I looked, we have maybe 75 or 80 left. So
Act now.
I would say that we gave away close to that today. So, because I put something on Front Porch Forum last night. So they were a popular item today. And then the last thing I wanted to, first of all, I want to thank those who have been able to join us for the Board of Abatement hearings. We've heard over 70 of them so far, most of them flood related. We do have 7 more. And I have determined that 5 of them I really would like to hear in advance of the April 15th deadline for being able to apply to the state for reimbursement of the education portion. So I'm hoping that depending on where things end up tonight with regards to next week's meeting schedule, that we can hold these 5 abatement hearings either before the meeting on the Tuesday the 9th or before Thursday the 11th, depending on where we fall. It's been working out really well. They've been going really smoothly and quickly. We're getting lots of good information in advance, so people have an opportunity to look. So I would imagine that if we scheduled the hearings to start at, 5:15 or 5:30, we should be able to get them done before the regular start of the meeting at 6. So as we're talking about meeting schedules later in the agenda, I will bring that up so that hopefully we can finalize that. And that's all I've got.
Are there any questions for the clerk treasurer?
So there's just one Tuesday, correct, Carol? Open before the 15th?
Just one Tuesday, correct. But we're already scheduled to meet next Thursday because the 11th is the date that we have to do for the first charter change public hearing and approve the warning.
Gotcha.
So we had to do a special date because of the timings.
So we'll be doing it the 11th.
Yes, we're definitely
Okay.
meeting on the 11th. The question is, because there was a desire by the council to hold off-week meetings to discuss housing issues, whether that will apply next week on the 9th.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Carol, are you assembling the town report this year?
Nope,
Or-
never
okay,
have,
all right,
never
have.
will.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
Sanders.
I'll hold that question then, so.
It's through the manager's office.
Okay. Yeah. With that takes us, if there are no further questions for our clerk treasurer, that takes us to our Liquor and Cannabis Control Board.
Nothing.
We don't have anything for that tonight, so we're up to item 7 on the agenda, the city manager's report. Manager Shirley Castro.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple updates for council. We have, just as I think a reminder, but we have 17 buyout applications underway with VEM. And these are all the properties that were identified several weeks ago at a council meeting for potential flood mitigation. So this includes properties Vine Scampini, River Granite area, and Harrington Avenue. So all of those owners have been notified. They've all received the application. Several of them have been coming to Janet with those forms already signed, and then I've signed them. As I mentioned to the owners in our communications, as I've mentioned to the council, that this doesn't mean any buyouts have been approved. What we're doing is we're trying to get ahead of the game here. These are properties that have been identified as really high potential mitigation areas. Once we get some hard data about how good the mitigation is, then hopefully with these people being in the queue, then we can strike quickly once we get that information. So we've mentioned that to the property owners. We've said, again, this is not final. You're not approved. We're just trying to get you moving so that we don't have to start the clock months from now instead of, The clerk mentioned some of the eclipse planning issues that have been going on. As Carol mentioned, Merchants Row and the parking lot will be closed to traffic beginning at 12. So we're working with Tracy. Tracy's been meeting with the department heads on a pretty regular basis to get the word out to merchants so they can get the word out to their customers, so people can make alternate arrangements for parking that day. We're preparing it's hard to prepare for an unknown number of people. It could be anything from a Heritage Festival equivalent crowd to twice that to, umpteenth times that. So we're basically preparing in scales. We're ready to staff up. We're going to hold some staff back in Public Works and public safety. We're working with the school on some auxiliary parking. So we're going to roll those things out as we get a better sense for the potential crowds, but we're basically prepared for a scale of normal, very large event to once in a lifetime large event. So.
And have all the dry parking places been?
No, it's actually been really low uptake on those, which a little bit surprising. I think we've theorized, and I think there's the clerk's theory, which I think is a good one, that people who hadn't made plans had been waiting for the forecast. And so now that the forecast looks fairly reasonable for that day, we think that there may be some last minute people who are looking for a place to stay. And so maybe we'll get some uptake. So not a lot, but maybe we'll see in this last week if those who are waiting for the last minute will need a place to stay. And then we are, as I mentioned, as part of the budget, we're really happy with the partnership with the town to use the yard waste site on a seasonal basis. We are helping them because of this increased use to locate volunteers to help operate the Upper Holden Road yard waste site. They use volunteers to keep this affordable. And so with the added use, I think if there's Barre City residents who'd like to volunteer in the summer and the fall, it'd be fantastic, and they can reach out to me. There's not, you're not required to help unload. You're just basically there to open and close the facility, direct people to the appropriate locations, and it can be 1 or more days a week for 2 to 3 hours. So not a huge commitment. And if you're interested, you should contact me, 802-476-0241, and we will connect you with the right people at the town for that.
Is that something that high school kids can take advantage of for community service hours?
They may be able to. Let me ask the town manager,
Okay.
and I'm happy to follow up on that.
Sure, thank you.
We have invite council and folks listening to the BOR turf ribbon cutting ceremony also this Saturday from 11 to 1 p.m. at the BOR. The turf was installed today. They're finishing it up tomorrow with the corners. And so really excited about this, making this a year-round facility, not just for it certainly has revenue implications, but really for the recreational value to the city and our residents as well. So really glad to see how that's going. And so come see it on Saturday, April 6th from 11 to 1. We'll have some stations set up for people to try it out. And some 5 lucky people will get a free 1-hour rental for the building. And then just want to follow up with council on some questions we've gotten from constituents. I know this is a long-standing one. There's a tree on Nelson Street that I've heard from a couple councilors on. We are working with Tree Works to take down a branch over the Green Mountain Power wires. I think if you live in that area, you can probably know what tree that is. It's pretty ominous. And so Green Mountain Power has agreed to pay for it. We just need to basically scale down the invoice, the proposal to get to the actual cost. Several of you mentioned to me the painting of the steps at the BOR, which is on the facility staff list. They need to wait for appropriate weather for the paint to stick, and now with the snow coming, they'll have to wait, but that is definitely on their to-do list up at the Civic Center. And we are ordering parts to repair the pedestrian button at Hill Street and Ayers, which I know triggers some the walk sign at odd hours of the night. So just some odds and ends that had come up from council.
Manager, or Steve McKenzie.
Just a quickie, you mentioned the painting the stairs in the front of the yard. I'd like to make a suggestion that you obtain a quote and negotiate a change order if the quote is favorable with Beatty to actually repair the back steps, the back entrances. The concrete steps are extremely dangerous. I think they're a safety hazard. And as long as we have a contractor there, try to take advantage of them being there and hopefully getting a good price. But whether a contractor does it or the staff does it, it really needs to be taken care of.
Oh, yeah. BD is a roofing contract. I'm not sure if he can do it, but I'll work with the team over there.
Didn't they have wasn't the part of that the Civic Center repairs?
It's the roof over it's the roof over the main entrance, right? That's the same place with the steps, but yeah.
Regardless of who does it, it's
got to get
really
done.
safety aspect.
Yeah.
Are there other questions for the manager? I had a question about the opening on Washington Street, if there's a estimated timeline to get paved.
I don't have the timeline. I can check with Public Works and have an update at next week's meeting.
Okay, and then related to that, I've just noticed there's a lot of debris still in the streets, and I think the parking ban is getting lifted.
It has been lifted.
It has been lifted.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a process like when the street sweeper's out doing the spring cleanups to give people heads up so they can move their vehicle off the street ahead of time, or to?
We can try. It's hard to do it on the residential areas just because of the reach of how we contact those people. We have real good luck, for example, with a very specific captured audience, which is Main Street. So I know that they were trying to focus on that this week because of the crowds we're expecting for the eclipse. So we can certainly try to make those announcements as they make their rounds. I think the challenge is, are we reaching, what medium is the best way to reach people? And so, but we'll certainly, if we can get the routes ahead of time, we're happy to put those out. Yeah.
And in future years, I think it'd be great if they could get at least one full sweep of the city before the parking ban is lifted. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of that is weather dependent as well with that machine, but yeah.
And then on the water, our rate study contract, are you willing to send that?
Oh, absolutely. It's a public document. It was in the packet last week. The only difference will be my signature scribbled on it.
Okay, all right. Are there any other questions for the manager? I don't think I have any. Councilor Wozniak?
Just a quick thing, Nicholas, that I thought of when you mentioned the tree branch. There are some on Church Street, near the parking lot for heading church. There are some very dangly wires. They don't get many big trucks or anything down that street, so it's not an issue. But a tall person could probably reach up and smack the electricity wire that's hanging down there. And I imagine that's a GMP thing, not a.
Yeah, they're actually. I'm happy to reach out to them. They're actually quite responsive on these kinds of things, so I'm happy to make that connection.
It's not an issue now, but it could be, and then it'd be bad.
All right. If there are no other questions, then that takes us to the housing actions, item B1, with the housing development incentive proposal presented by Councilor Lozon. Councilor Lozon.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think was the email that I sent to our delegation and to Commissioner Goldstein, I think it was in the packet this week, so you've all had a chance to read that. So basically, those are the proposals. I think the first three, obviously, everyone's familiar with that, with our TIF district. Barre was fortunate enough to lobby and receive an extension on our TIF district. That extension was through, I believe 2026, Carol?
For incurrence of final debt, yeah.
Correct, for incurrence of final debt. So I would like the city council to collectively ask the legislature for an additional 2 years till 2028, an additional 2-year extension on our TIF. In addition, and I think there was some confusion about this, got a little pushback from you, Mayor, I would ask the legislature for a hold harmless. So if the municipality wanted to do property tax stabilization within our TIF, currently that is prohibited. So it works against the city, works against the revenue. But what I would ask the legislature for is specific legislative relief for a hold harmless clause. In other words, even if the city did want to negotiate a property tax stabilization agreement to encourage projects within our existing TIF district, we would not be penalized for that. So the city would be made whole for those funds. Lastly, along the lines of TIF district, I talked about normally it's an application that has to be submitted, but it can also be led by legislative action that the city of Barre be granted a TIF district in our north end. And I think we'd all agree that our north end is certainly one big but for. And then lastly, was the property tax, the upfronting, the property tax anticipation note program that I came up with, which is a program that would be available to anyone building within Barre City. This would be Barre City specific. So if you had a young couple, for example, that was going to build a duplex and do some infill development and have mom and dad live next door, or have anyone else live next door, they would receive upfront funds equal to 10 years worth of their property tax payments. So if the property tax payments, for example, were $5,000 a year, they would receive $50,000 to assist with constructing that duplex, trying to buy some of those upfront costs down. So I'm going to ask for council approval, I guess, on the first three. I'd actually like to save the last one because Pat Moulton is here to discuss a plan that is similar that the governor has presented to the legislature. So I think those conversations kind of dovetail nicely together.
Sure. So
I don't know how you all feel about the first three, again, creation of a TIF district and assistance with our downtown TIF district.
How about we start with the 2-year extension and just go through those questions?
Sure.
If you're amenable to that. Is there a motion to support Council Lozon proposal to request a 2-year extension to our existing downtown tax increment financing district?
Self-serving, so moved.
Second.
A motion and there's a second. Is there any discussion on that?
I'd like to know more, like what do you see happening in terms of development projects there?
Currently, nothing. And that's exactly why, because we were successful in lobbying for the extension that was COVID related. Downtown projects, kind of projects that we're talking about, are projects that literally take a year of planning, a year of year of lining up financing, year of permitting. It's just, so as I look at what is going on right now and what is likely to happen in the next year, there are 2 projects that I'm aware of. One I'm very familiar with that is going to be 7 to 8 units. And the other I'm also very familiar with is going to be 4 units and resulting commercial space. But both of those projects have been in the planning stages for going on 12 months. So I look at what's happening now. I look at even our Seminary Street project. And again, we haven't entered into a developer's agreement. We don't quite know what the effect of that project is going to be on the grand list. But we do know that there's going to be a significant planning period to get that project off the ground. So again, what these ideas are all about is giving the city of Barre every advantage I can to encourage development and to encourage housing.
And what are the boundaries of the TIF district?
Boundaries of, you're not familiar with the downtown TIF district?
Yeah.
Okay, the downtown TIF
Does it
district.
include North
I don't think
Seminary?
it's been in our packet.
North Seminary, it includes that lot on North Seminary, yes. Then the boundary is
Yep,
Summer.
it's the intersection Hospital Hill down to North Main Street, over to Summer Street. So it's bounded on the east side by Summer Street. It's bounded on the west side by the river. Goes down to this intersection here. It actually includes the post office and right at this intersection. And it includes around the park. So
The
I would
river side of 302 is just for further information. The river side of 302 is New Market's tax credit eligible. The other side is not. It's a really weird deal because it keeps flipping based on the census tract.
I would speak in favorably to this proposal. I think our last extension request was related to the just the COVID impact and how tumultuous it made the marketplace for real estate development. I think we're still seeing some of that unpredictability in land, labor, lumber, lending, as well as we have an actual developer that submitted a letter of interest for Seminary Street. We may very well need to look at infrastructure needs for that project to see if it would be a otherwise prohibiting factor about meet the but-for test for the tax increment financing district. And also the Planning Commission does have a project that I think VHB is the contractor for downtown streetscaping, which would include like Summer and Elm and a lot. Correct me if I'm wrong, Council Lozon, or Clerk Dawes, but I believe our last TIF district did a lot of streetscaping, funded a lot of streetscaping
Yep,
improvements.
as part of the parking improvements, yep, yeah.
So
Probably the most well-known, of course, is the Pearl Street Pedway, so.
I think, those are just, I think, a few examples of potential projects that might be possible with a tier extension, acknowledging that it would require a TIF plan amendment and approval by the Vermont Economic Progress Council.
Because it stops at Summer Street, we wouldn't really be able to do anything with the intersection of Maple and 62, because
Yeah,
it's,
yes, it actually includes that intersection,
So we could
and
do
it
something.
goes, on the west side, it includes one property, two properties deep, if I recall. It's
the-
actually
the
two
park
properties deep.
And the park and then the.
And then
next
it
bit.
also includes the Denty Park,
Right.
and the little parking lot next to it, which belongs to the city. It doesn't go deeper than that, so it doesn't include Norway, but it does include the park there, so. And it includes that left-hand side of Maple Avenue through the new intersection there with the traffic signal.
Are there any further questions or discussion before I call the question? All right, there's a motion and a second to support a tier extension to the TIF district for the reasons mentioned. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. That takes us to your second proposal, Council Lozon, which would be to allow the city to stabilize taxes within a tax increment financing district.
Provided the TIF district was held harmless.
So moved?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. What does that mean? How does that work when a TIF district is held harmless?
It means that we would have to find a little bit of a long shot, because it means that included in specific legislative relief, there would have to be a funding mechanism. Because generally, I mean, obviously, when you do property tax stabilization, you're deferring revenue. City gets to, so in the TIF district, as you know, with the increment, we keep a percentage, the state gets a percentage. City of Barre would have to be made whole for that percentage.
And by whom would we be made whole?
Well, I'm kind of hoping the state of Vermont. I mean, these are, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yep.
And as I've looked around the state, and I look at other municipalities developing, I look at what's going on in Berlin in their town center, I look at development in other places, and it just occurred to me that we need a competitive advantage. That in order for the city of Barre to be successful, we have to be able to offer developers something that no one else can, and say, this is why you should build here, because we can provide you with financial incentives. I mean, states do it all the time to attract businesses. I mean, it's part of our core strategy within the state when we do economic development, and we try to attract businesses to Vermont.
and that's for existing businesses, because the new businesses would already have it.
That is for assisting businesses.
If you negotiated a property tax stabilization, it would be for businesses that are.
No, it would be for anyone who wants to develop housing. Anyone who wants to develop housing. So it would not be necessarily for businesses. It would be for developers wishing to develop housing. Whether it's cooperative housing, low-income housing, market rate housing, workforce housing, we need housing.
Like someone like Down Street already has some incentives for development, and it already, so it seems to me that.
Well, Down Street isn't the only developer in the world.
Correct. But the problem is that we have to have revenues, and that if we negotiate property tax stabilizations, then where does the revenue come from?
Well, if we're successful in being made whole, it doesn't come from our taxpayers. And like I said, it's a big ask, it's a big if, but if you don't ask, you don't get. So it could be a very quick no in the legislature. There's not exactly a lot of money floating around in the state coffers. So it could be a very quick no, but as I said, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'm not aware of any municipality that can offer in the state of Vermont, that can offer a developer property tax stabilization and then be held harmless to grow their TIF district. So again, I'm just looking at the programs that we do have and saying, well, how do we make them better? How do we make it more attractive for a developer to choose Barre as opposed to Berlin, or as opposed to Montpelier or Stowe or Burlington?
And there's a duration on this tax stabilization?
Duration on the tax stabilization generally would be up to 10 years. It depends on the size of the project. You certainly wouldn't offer someone proposing to build a $3 million building the same size incentives as you would someone looking to build, say, a $20 million building.
I'm wondering what would happen if we have another flood during this 10-year period? Just sort of looking at the city manager.
City Place.
What would happen and the
What if we have
impacts?
another flood? City Place is great, but what about the other places that might, suppose we have another flood and we haven't done stabilization, the bridges aren't raised, we don't really have a buffer, there's another flood. Could happen, right? So we need revenues. We're back in the same position that we were. And we have a tax stabilization in place that affects a lot of the properties. What kind of position, do you feel like that's a good position for us to be in?
I mean, if it's a loss in revenue, we're going to be in trouble no matter what. I think what I hear is that if it's a held harmless, then there would be another revenue source. I mean, any flood like this is we're going to be back with our tin hat at the legislature, no matter what. There's regardless of whether, of what tools we have out there.
Councilor Deering?
I just kind of think of it as money in your back pocket at that point if we have a flood, because then at some point the money is going to kick back to the city, because then the tax stabilization is going to stop. So I think that being able to build the housing units for people to live in, I think that's one of our biggest obstacles and biggest challenges and things that we need to really accomplish the most. And I mean, really, that's just the general gist of it, is that we need housing. And I think that whatever we can do to do that and not hold the city harmless would be great.
See, Byrne Rose, and then Councilor Shambell, and then Councilor Booton.
Hi, is it possible I heard Councilor Lozon say that you wouldn't offer the same thing for a $3 million project as you would for a $20 million project. So what about, there must be places for housing that people might have a duplex or a building with 4 units kind of a thing. Are there adjustments to the rates that people get or the length of time that you get? So is it possible to offer the TIF district for 5 years instead of 10 years? Because I don't know how long, but it's probably not been that long that Blanchard Block and that City Place have been contributing to the taxes that we have here. Those are just some questions. Thank you.
Sure, may I answer them? So the answer is yes, Byrne. If someone decided, I don't know that we've seen too many duplexes or even fourplexes built within our TIF district, but if someone did want to build a duplex or a fourplex within the TIF district, the program would certainly be open to them. As I said, it's just another development tool. And the wonderful thing about any sort of property tax stabilization agreement is in advance what you're getting. This is a council that offered $250,000, not of deferred revenue, real money we had in hand. And we offered $250,000 to support 9 units. And now we are considering offering an additional $250,000 to support an unknown number of units. I mean, what I like about property tax stabilization, number one, it works. It's been proven in the city of Barre that it works. And number two, you don't have to say yes. If it isn't a good enough deal, the council has to vote collectively. It is not automatic. They have to be approved. So it's simply another tool. And as I said last week, if I came to you right now and said, in a year, there could be an additional 100 units of housing in the city for everyone. Workforce housing, affordable housing. However, we wouldn't get any revenue for a 5 or 10 year period. I know, I hope a lot of you would think really hard about that before saying no. We desperately need housing to support our citizens and to support our businesses.
So can I just ask you a little clarification?
You can ask
So
the mayor,
when-
he'll relay it.
Mayor, may I ask Mr. Lozon, Councilor Lozon?
Because everybody's so good about following rules of procedure.
That's right. I'm just jumping back because you were answering that question. So you said 5 or 10 years. When does that get decided? What you're going to offer? If we have a TIF district, when and how do we decide what we're going to offer to whomever wants to be a prospective builder?
Yeah, and with that, I just, before pivoting to Councilor Chambel, I think the proposal splits the question. So one is that there's TIF decision-making about what bonds we take out for projects that wouldn't happen otherwise without that investment. And the increment from that point is used to repay those bonds. And the terms of those all flow through council in this decision-making. The proposal by Councilor Lozon would be to stabilize taxes so that the increment would still go to pay back the bonds, but in theory, the state would pick up the bill for the municipal and education tax rate to cover that tax stabilization. And I think those timelines for both tax stabilization and the TIF would be put forward within the bounds of either statute for TIF or in their rulemaking and our policy as a city for tax stabilization.
Yep, exactly.
Councilor Chambel?
Well, that answer you just gave gets me a little closer in terms of the understanding. So I'm going to ask you, Councilor Lozon, to simplify it a little more. This is what I think I'm hearing, which is that with the TIF district, we're going to contribute, put money forward in order for development to happen because it wouldn't happen otherwise. Am I sort of correct on that?
We're going to reduce the property taxes for the developer over a certain period of time. But no, my ask is that the city be held harmless within the TIF district. So in other words, the city, we would have to come up with a revenue mechanism so that we're not deferring the revenue within the TIF district. It's a big ask.
If I may, actually, Councilor Chambel was asking about how the TIF district functions.
Oh, I apologize.
And so
I'm sorry, how the
got
TIF
apples
district works.
Instead of oranges. What the TIF district, what you said is essentially right. The city makes the public investments, parking, water, sewer, whatever infrastructure investments are necessary to support a development project that wouldn't happen but for those public investments. Those investments are paid for with a bond that is approved by the voters and is financed through the increment. You've heard us talk about the additional taxes on a property that has had development on it. So, and those are voter approved.
So let's say the property taxes, because of that development, the city is collecting $100,000 more in property taxes. We get to keep 70% of that money, including the education fund. Normally, the education fund is never in play. So we get to keep 70% of that money to service the debt for those infrastructure improvements. And then 30% of the education fund, we keep 100% of the municipal, of course. But 30% of the education fund revenue goes to the state of Vermont as opposed to 100%.
Okay, so that would be the TIF district.
Yes, that would be within the
But
TIF,
then
yes.
with the other, which is putting tax stabilization on for I wasn't sure whether you said 5 or 10 years. I thought I heard both, but.
Both. 5 or 10.
5 or 10.
Most property tax stabilization agreements are development specific. In other words, there's no cut and dried rule. Some are 5, some are 10.
So, but what that does in effect is help out the developer.
Yes.
To want to jump on.
Correct.
So,
And the
It
TIF bond
helps
is 30
out,
years?
it helps out everyone when it drives the cost of housing down.
It can be, the current bond that we have is 25.
25,
It
okay.
can be 20, 25, 30. If you're doing 30, you usually have to be doing longer life infrastructure kind of stuff, water, wastewater kind of stuff. 20, 25 is pretty typical.
Before pivoting to Council Bowden, I have a question that kind of relates to the school budget. I'm not quite sure how it works, but I know the school budgets for tax stabilization that the city extends, right? And so this would be, if for new tax stabilizations, there would have to be there's a mechanism where the state would be paying back the school district?
No, pay the education fund. Money
school
goes
district
from
doesn't-
us, the education fund, and then back to the school.
I'm sorry, too many people were talking at the same time. Carol?
Well, the school district doesn't account for tax stabilizations, TIF district, any of that kind of stuff in calculating their budgets. When the Agency of Education develops the amount of money that the city of Barre has to pay to the school on an annual basis, they take into consideration the TIF district and actually, they don't take into consideration tax stabilization agreements. Tax stabilization agreements, we take into consideration when we calculate and adopt our local agreement tax rate. So.
But there is a ballot question, right, that goes before the voters on tax stabilization.
Nope.
Fund.
Nope.
There was one
For TIF.
decades ago to allow it to be added to our charter, and it's in our charter.
Okay, all right. Councilor Booten?
Just so you know, education financing is just like bizarre in Vermont, so I wouldn't even try.
Somebody's got to try.
That being said, you know, I think the hangup is tax stabilization, and I'll just point to the Blanchard block. Having a tool at our disposal is better than not having it. As most know, I voted against almost every single one of our tax stabilizations because of the education portion of it. Based on what I'm hearing from Councilor Lozon is that would take that problem away. Is that correct?
Correct.
So what we're talking about is a very, very sweet deal for the city. And like he said, if we don't ask, we don't get. And there's nothing wrong with asking.
Councilor Schoenberg?
I'm opening this up to whomever. What's the worst thing that can happen out of this? I mean, what I'm hearing, just because I don't do money quite as well as everybody else, is that with the TIF district, we put a fair amount in and it'll eventually come back. It'll eventually come back when projects are completed. But then, and is that project, but then the project gets tax stabilization also for the developer. Are we doubly losing money?
Are we doubling? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no, I think the answer to that would be no, because the proposal that Council Lozon's putting forward would be that normally if we stabilize taxes within the TIF district, it is double dip and we do lose, like the People's Health and Wellness. That was sort of a double dip. But under this proposal, the thought is that there would be legislation and state appropriations that would set up some fund that would allow, as a council approves each tax stabilization, that presumably some state agency would give us money to cover that state stabilization. So I don't think it would be double dipping in this case.
Correct.
Councilor Wozniak?
Yeah, so like Councilor Booten, I'm very skeptical of tax stabilization, especially in a post-flood, environment. What?
That's not what I said.
Okay, sorry, you voted no on all of them. That smacks of skepticism to me, but semantics.
Okay, let's let Councilor Wozniak finish his thought.
So I don't like tax stabilization, but I think there's a couple of important things here. The first one is that that the council would ultimately have the authority to do whatever tax stabilization comes up. So like if a tax stabilization proposal does come up from a developer, the city council has the ability to say like, no, we're not going to do that for this project, or yes, we will for XYZ reason. And I really want to see Jane Kitchell's face when she reads this. So I'm very much in support of sending this to the legislature.
I could try to make sure you're there, but I can't
Yeah,
promise.
I need to clarify my position on that, because just for clarity, I'm very supportive of tax stabilization. The issue that I have with when we're approving tax stabilization is that if you stabilize the education portion, everybody else pays for it because the state expects that money. Under this plan, that's not going to be the case. But I am very supportive of tax stabilization. Just for clarity, it's just the
So you haven't supported any
education.
projects.
I haven't, there's only been one, but that's because they've always included education portion. And I've been very consistent on the fact that I don't like the idea of forcing other folks to pay for that. And because there's one thing to say that it's capped at this and we're not just collecting money off from it, but the education portion, the state of Vermont still requires us to give that money up. And that's all. So very supportive of tax stabilization.
We're going to Councilor Chambel. It doesn't seem to me like this project this proposal, if we are held harmless, would have us losing ground. But I do have some hesitancy about tax stabilization generally, and I voted against the last policy because we have the highest municipal tax rate in the state. We have very cost-burdened households, extremely cost-burdened households. 50% of our households are renters. I think our poverty rate's above 20%. And anytime we set up a TIF district or anytime we stabilize taxes, the rest of the taxpayers have to carry that burden. And I know we've all heard, standing on front porches or knocking on doors or talking to constituents, that people are concerned about how much they have to pay. I just talked with a potential home buyer who's a renter in Barre over the weekend. He was looking at a house and he said, I would love to be able to become a homeowner, but the way the finances work out, the taxes are just too high on this property, and we're losing ground every year. It's not like we're not losing ground because we're seeing double-digit healthcare cost increase. We're seeing we're seeing all types of pressures related to the destruction of Grand List. Either it's through the demolition of buildings or through fires, and now through the floods. And so there's like a real equity conversation that needs to happen about who carries the burden for that 10-year period or that 5-year period or that 25-year period. And when we actually start to regain fiscal capacity, because we've been doing a lot of this, and we've gotten some good developments in. We've grown the Grand List, but we haven't really ever gotten ahead or regained fiscal capacity. And so that's just my feeling of caution for the city taxpayers who have to foot the bill for everybody else. So Councilor, I think Chambel and then Councilor Stockwell.
I'll defer to Councilor Stockwell for now while I figure out my question, because I've lost my train.
Councilor Stockwell.
What I want to see in development is something that makes a difference for working and middle-class families. It does make it possible for them to own homes and stay in their homes, and also that we reduce the poverty rate. which is edging towards 24%. So any development that we do should be thinking about like, well, how do we get people into home ownership? How do we make sure that people who are in home ownership can stay there? And the tax rate is really important. So I would actually not like to vote on this proposal until we hear a couple things. I would like to hear Pat Moulton's proposal and see how it balances out. I would also like to hear an evaluation of the difference between a TIF district, I mean, I know some of the things, the difference between a TIF district and a neighborhood development area. It seems to me that in terms of development for housing, a neighborhood development area is a far stronger thing for the North End, a far more appropriate tool. So, but I don't know it all, and I would love to hear an evaluation that talks about both of those tools and how they stack up against each other.
No, and is that a motion or no?
It's a motion
Motion
to hear, to,
We already have a motion on the table,
already a
Mr.
motion.
Mayor.
but
So
there could be a motion.
there could be an amendment, but we can't take a second, an independent motion on top of a motion that's
Right,
already under
yeah.
discussion.
friendly
Oh, holy
amendment,
cow, I'll just withdraw. You're so damn afraid to do anything.
Tom,
It's
please.
crazy.
friendly amendment.
Wow.
That we.
What's the worst thing that can happen?
Hear-
Just what's happening now.
That we
Nothing.
hear
Please be
Pat
civil.
Moulton's, and that we hear more information about neighborhood development area versus TIF district.
So I seconded that, right? I would not
You
accept
made the
that.
motion.
I made the
You
motion,
remember
I won't
Tom was
accept
the
the
second.
friendly amendment. And besides,
Postpone in this meeting until till we've heard from that. Okay, all right. So that takes us to the establishment of a TIF district in the North End. If you can keep it cool, Don.
oh,
Oh, I'm
Wait.
fine.
Okay.
Believe me.
so the motion's out
Well, you'll
there.
know.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, well, so there's I'm sorry, you're right, Council Booton. There's a motion, is there a second?
We already have
We
a
already have a
motion and
second.
second on the table.
I do want to clarify that we don't go backwards with stabilizations. That's not correct. I mean, especially if we're only doing the municipal, we're not going backwards. You can't say, I mean, I think of,
We do for those 10-year periods, we do, because our costs are going up at a very,
sure,
at a
I
higher
mean,
rate. So
I'll say this though, the property taxes that we were getting on the old Coins and Hobby building that was there many, many years ago before it was demolished is a lot less than what we're getting right now.
So there's the motion and a second to approve this. There's a friendly amendment to just postpone it to a later point in the meeting. Is there a second for that motion?
Sure.
Second, okay. Is there a first?
Where did that just go? We haven't voted on the first one.
No, we haven't. We're just postponing this for, to be able to hear a little bit more information from Pat Moulton and hear it in the context of the other proposals. So there's a motion and a second to just delay this within the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. That takes us to Tom's third proposal.
I'm sorry, was there a nay?
Oh, no, we're
Okay,
skipping
I
over
just-
that as well.
Is there a nay? I'm sorry.
I was a nay.
I think we've had the commissioner, I think we've had Pat Moulton, and I think we've had the commissioner of taxes waiting long enough. So we can come back to this later if the council's amenable.
So, Tom, you want to delay the discussion of the TIF district in the North
Sure.
End? And you want to go to the property tax, what's it called, anticipation? What's the name, again, if you could remind me, Tom?
A tax anticipation note.
Is that
Nope,
something
we're
you
gonna,
want to
no, my
delay?
preference would be to, like I said, we have Commissioner Goldstein, I believe, on the line. I believe I saw Commissioner Bolio, and
Are they here to present?
they're
your
on the
idea?
agenda, correct?
So,
Okay, all right.
so what just happened is we are tabling the discussion until after this discussion.
We didn't vote to table. I just want to make sure we're using the correct
Correct.
parliamentary
Sorry,
terms.
we postponed
voted to
it.
postpone action on the motion until after hearing from the people that are here to present on item B2.
Correct.
All right, so who's up for item B2? So,
I'd be happy to kick things off, Your Honor. This is Pat Moulton, Central Vermont Flood Recovery Officer, working with the city of Barre. And I have to say, this is not my proposal. This is Governor Scott's proposal, and specifically the work of the Tax Department, Agency of Commerce. And with me tonight is Craig Bolio, who is the Commissioner of Taxes for the state of Vermont. and he is far better versed in this, but this is another potential tool in the quiver of not just Barre, but other communities in Vermont. And we're asking for the city council's support tonight to try to help move this legislation forward in the legislature. It's currently part of a housing bill. Commissioner Bolio will know the status better than I, but what we're ultimately seeking is the council's discussion and potentially approval that you would add your voice to those seeking to see this legislation pass so that it can help with not just flood recovery, but generally housing anywhere in the state. So if, with your permission, I'd be happy to kick the microphone to Commissioner Bolio.
Thank you, Pat.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Can folks hear me okay?
We can, sir.
Awesome. Good evening. I'm Craig Bolio, the Vermont Tax Commissioner, and I appreciate members of the council for the opportunity to speak to this proposal. I appreciate Pat for that introduction and Nicholas for running the slides for me. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to discuss some of the details in the proposal for the council's consideration. At a high level, this tax incentive is a proposal that's part of the tripartisan housing package that has been championed and supported by the governor. It is modeled after programs that are used around the country in a lot of jurisdictions, at least a dozen states that I'm aware of. And for folks aware of things like tax stabilization agreements in Vermont, which I just heard a lot of discussion about, I think that this proposal will sound familiar with some key differences that I think will be appealing to folks. At a high level, right, this is really a pitch to institute a program similar to tax stabilization that holds towns harmless for the education funds owed for that stabilization. And there are some guardrails and parameters about what types of property can qualify, with a policy goal to reduce the cost of bringing new housing units online and encourage smart growth where we want growth to occur. So diving in, perfect, right on the slide that I wanted. Thank you, Nicholas. This proposal would allow qualifying newly constructed or rehabilitated residential properties to have their property value frozen at the pre-improvement value, right? So if you buy a plot of land for $100,000 and you build a multi-unit apartment complex that has a value of 1.5 million, the property taxes would be based on $100,000 of value. The freeze is for 5 years from the date the unit is put online for residential use, and I'll speak in upcoming slides about what some of the rules and guardrails around that. And I think very important for this discussion, the language that was put forward by the governor, the freeze is for the education taxes only by default, and the values on the education grand list only. So by default, town revenues are unimpacted, and towns would receive full municipal taxes by default. However, the language does provide an option for municipalities to vote in an equivalent freeze on municipal values through a local vote. And they could either do that by voting to have this specific policy be available to all of the properties that get the statewide freeze, or you may be able to use municipal tax stabilization on a project by project basis. But very important, by default, we're talking education funds only, and the town is not required to make up those education amounts. It's a true exemption from education taxes on that property. Nicholas, perfect, right? Reading my mind, I appreciate it. So let's talk a little about what property can qualify, right? So as I mentioned, it's residential property only, and the property must be used as either an owner-occupied homestead or a long-term rental. So residential properties that are used as second homes and short-term rentals cannot qualify. The owners must apply to the state for the freeze. The freeze cannot be obtained until the property is actually being used for one of those two eligible purposes. So it must be demonstrated that it's used for those purposes. And then there's an annual certification process where the owner must continue to certify that the property is used for those eligible purposes. And if at any point it stops being used for those eligible purposes, the back taxes from the exemption are owed. There's also a provision that says that multifamily and mixed use buildings must be designated mixed income buildings. So a portion of the units must be deemed affordable. And there's also definitions for rehab and blighted properties to make sure that it's truly eliminating substandard structural or unsanitary conditions, and also has some investment minimums to ensure that there's really robust rehab going on those properties. Perfect. Thank you, Nicholas. So administration, I've spoken to many of these already in other slides, but just to again reiterate, applications will go through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, both the initial application and annual certification. The freeze begins in the first property tax year after the exemption is approved and occupancy, either as a long-term rental or owner-occupied, is confirmed. And then at the end of the 5 years, the property is taxed at its full grand list value. Again, by default, we're only talking about a change on education taxes there. And if a property is sold, right, so if there is construction of a single family home and it gets sold, the new owner, the buyer, can continue to enjoy that freeze if they continue to use the property for eligible purposes. And I think this is my last slide, but as mentioned, this is one of the tax incentives that is in Governor Scott's housing package. It's in 2 bills in the legislature currently, so there's a version in the House and a version in the Senate. In the House, it is in H719. In the Senate, it is in S311. I believe the Senate bill is the one that is moving at this time. So S311 has been voted favorably out of Senate Economic Development, is currently being discussed in Senate Natural Resources. But of course, with this proposal, the Senate Finance Committee is also having some of those discussions. I would note one of the rules for the program as originally drafted is that the properties to qualify must be in a designated downtown village center neighborhood development area or federal new market tax credit zone, which is a U.S. Treasury designation. And I do recognize that those designations do not capture all of the areas in Barre that cover the North End residential area. But I will say the governor and administration are open to a discussion to find ways to enhance or add to that language to allow for additional eligibility in Barre, and happy to be part of those discussions. And with that, I will toss it back to Pat just to summarize and close. And I again, thank the council for the time and opportunity to speak to this.
Thanks, Craig. And just as this slide suggests, what we're hoping is the council could see fit to support this legislation with the understanding that language be added that could make sure the North End specifically of Barre would be eligible. And Commissioner Bolio and Commissioner Goldstein and I have been talking about what that language might be. It could be as simple as adding or flood affected communities, or it could be some other language, because this is intended to be a statewide tool and is another tool that could support development. And so with that, I'd be happy to just shut up and let you all ask questions.
Other questions for Pat? Councilor Wozniak.
Yeah, Pat or Commissioner Bolio, either way. So S311 was referred to the committee on February 20th. Has anything happened to, have there been committee discussions since the bill? It clearly didn't make crossover. So what discussions have been had in the committee about S311?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So there have been discussions in Senate Natural Resources. Admittedly, there have not been a lot of discussions about this specific tax proposal because that wouldn't be the jurisdiction of that committee. And that bill has a lot more provisions about land use, Act 250 reform, other regulatory reform as well. So these are conversations that are ongoing between both the Senate Finance and Senate Natural Resource Committee. Correct that it did not make crossover to have S311 move, but there is always an opportunity to add this language to a bill that might come across from the House. And I do believe, I don't want to speak for the legislature, but I think what folks are anticipating, given the ongoing discussions in these committees, is that those committees may be looking to do something like that with a bill that comes over to the House, because they continue to have these discussions and move it forward.
Are there any other municipalities which the state is asking to weigh in and support this?
This is the first city council that I've spoken to directly. But certainly we've been having discussions with other local officials and municipal officials, trying to gather support anywhere we can.
And if I may, we'll be having a conversation with the city of Montpelier as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Lozon.
Commissioner Pat, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for the creative ideas. Flood impacted communities like Barre need all the help we can get. One of the questions I had, I like the component where the education taxes are automatically frozen. And you mentioned in the legislation that it requires a full vote of the municipality, a citywide vote in our case, to approve the freezing of the municipal taxes. This city council currently has that ability in, I believe, or is it ordinance? I believe charter, correct?
It's in our charter.
It's in charter to freeze municipal taxes or to enter into property tax stabilization agreements. So knowing that, would we still have to go to a citywide vote? Which I'm not opposed to.
Yeah, I can answer that question in one way that may be satisfactory. I don't know if what you just described would preclude the city from having to do a vote for this specific program. And again, the way that this one is structured is to say that that vote would be to essentially piggyback a municipal freeze on any freeze that is approved by ACCD for the statewide program. However, again, I believe that there's nothing that would preclude a municipality from continuing to use a municipal level tax stabilization for that part alone on a project by project basis. So I think without not hoping I'm not putting my foot in my mouth here, I believe that you folks would be able to continue to use that tool specifically for the municipal side if you wanted.
But we wouldn't have to.
Correct. I think with the what you're describing for the existing authority for municipal tax stabilization, you could use that, I believe, as opposed to doing a citywide vote for.
And just to follow up on that, so one of the other things that we've been discussing here at council is, or one thing that I presented to the council, is the creation of a TIF district within the North End. Because what I heard you mention specifically is that because of the current language, which you are willing to assist, I mean, that most importantly, that's what I heard, is that you're willing to assist with that language. But currently, because of how the North End is designated, we are new markets tax credit eligible on the riverside of 302, which obviously is not the most dense residential area. So I think a TIF district makes the most sense on Barry's North End, only because it's one big but if. And if you look at the infrastructure, you know, the flood mitigation that's going to be required there, FEMA will make us whole on the buyouts. They will not make us whole. They will not even contribute to some of that mitigation. We're going to have to find those funds on our own, which is why I was leaning more towards a TIF district. But whether it's a TIF or NDA, you know, neighborhood designated area, I don't really care, as long as the city of Barre can take full advantage of the governor's plan and put that tool in its toolbox. So I heard you say that you would support changes to the language that would make our North End, our full North End, eligible, and I, for one, am anxious to work with you on that.
Yeah, we're open to that discussion. There's another element as well, right? We've heard concern about the initial drafting of the language disallowed it in TIF districts because of the fact that there would be two different deltas for the incentive. Upon further discussion, again, governor and administration are open to discussions that would allow it to overlap in TIF districts as well. There's just a conversation that I think needs to happen in the legislature, some logistics and math-related conversations about how to prioritize, you know, which delta in property value takes precedence at which time. But certainly the TIF districts have a longer period of using the increment than this value freeze that we're talking about. So we do see a path where both could be available. Again, will have to be a conversation in the legislature, and they'd have to be a willing partner to adjust that language.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I see Amy Gelford.
Hi, I had a question if it's not too complicated about the definition of blighted, because it sounds like rehabilitating a blighted property would be eligible, but then it also needs to be occupied. So there might be kind of a gap between how do you get from blighted to being able to occupy it. So it seems like one thing the council is debating is different strategies in terms of money up front versus longer term tax relief and that sort of thing. So is there an easy definition of blighted, like for everyday folks to understand?
Yeah, and I've got the language in front of me so I can read it. So the definition of blighted in this bill means substandard structural or housing conditions, including unsanitary and unsafe dwellings and deterioration sufficient to constitute a threat to human health, safety, and public welfare. And then the definition of rehab for that blighted property means extensive repair, reconstruction, or renovation of an existing dwelling or other structure, with or without demo, construction, enlargement, provided the repair, reconstruction, or renovation eliminates those substandard conditions that we just talked about, and then again has investment minimums of 15% or 75,000. Again, if folks have very strong opinions on that, again, we're open to discussing ideas, taking ideas, and just acknowledging this can be one tool out of many that are needed to help revitalize communities and jumpstart housing development.
Okay, yeah, one thing I've asked about before is we do have some vacant houses that are falling into disrepair that are, maybe scattered. They're not kind of in a single place for easy development, but I'd love to see some of our vacant houses, whatever's preventing them from getting fixed up and staying in the housing stock. But I guess it's just the question of whether somebody can pay for that work up front versus needing the cash up front versus needing, or grant up front versus paying for it over the long term. I also think we're still struggling as a city with defining what the north end is. And I just wonder if, in terms of definitions, like the city municipal plan has certain neighborhoods designated. So I think what we call the north end is maybe split into, 5 or 6 out of the numbered sections. Like I think my section might be called the Vine Street neighborhood or something, just because they had to pick one of the streets. So that might be a way to define the north end, is if we started using what's already in the city municipal plan.
Thank you, Amy. Under this proposal, would the municipality would not be held harmless in this case, right? It would be off our books for 5 years.
The municipality would receive full municipal revenue. Like the municipal taxes would be the fair market value of that property. Is that getting at your question?
No, I mean, during the period of tax stabilization, so it's a 5-year tax stabilization, under the proposal that Council Lozon mentioned for tax stabilization within the TIF district, there's this suggestion about a home harmless, and I'm wondering, would we continue to get revenues, or are we talking about, let's say we take 20% of the grand new development off the grand list, or in some cases existing development, or well, no, not I'm sorry, for new development, and I'm trying to think through what the fiscal impacts of that would be to our budget, given our cost forecasting.
If I'm under,
Yeah, for a period of like 5 years, like based on where we are right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you take anything off the grand list, it hurts. I mean, I think the question for council to weigh, right, is would the development happen otherwise or not? And then I think I may have misunderstood your question, Mayor, to me when you asked, but the municipal portion is only frozen if the municipality chooses to freeze it. I thought you were asking about if we're held harmless on the education side, which Pat or the commissioner may need to answer, but the municipal piece is you would proactively as a council have to choose to give that up as part of the proposal, as I understand it, as part of the proposal.
You're correct, Nicholas. Yeah, so Mayor, if I'm understanding your question correctly, the town will not be required to make up the education taxes that would have been owed. So essentially the value freeze is a true exemption from the education taxes. So the municipality owes nothing there. And in addition, by default, the municipality would receive municipal revenue with that property being taxed at its true fair market value, not its frozen pre-improvement value. Only the education value is frozen by default. Again, towns have the option, if they wish, to have a commensurate municipal freeze, but essentially this would hold municipalities harmless both from the education taxes and the municipal taxes by default.
Thank you, Commissioner Bolio. That was helpful. I see Joel Mulvaney and then Councilor Booton.
So presumably, this would encourage development, would certainly be an incentive for developers to develop in the North End. And so at the same time, that neighborhood in particular, but our city in general, is ripe for gentrification. And so my concern is that the city, the councilors figure out how to put some kinds of policies in place that would at least make things equitable for people so they're not priced out of their neighborhood in any way. And I really think that some kind of, what's the dirty word, rent stabilization or something like that would, would go a long way, but it has to precede the development so that it's very clear to everyone, including developers, that this is an issue. And it could even mean what kinds of limits we put on how many affordable units versus how many market rate. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Booton?
Yeah, the municipality does not go backward with tax stabilization. We just don't move forward, and it's not, it's a if but for, right? And if your value goes up, and it needs to be clear that it doesn't go backwards with tax stabilization. And anybody that thinks that is not thinking properly on that. Because your house is worth $100,000 and you do $200,000 improvement on it, we're just not seeing that increase. It doesn't mean that we're going down to $75,000. That's backwards.
Councilor Stuckel.
For the period of the 5-year freeze for the education tax, is there ongoing enrollment? Can anyone enroll during that period? Is it whoever is ready to go at the time it starts?
So there's actually a sunset on the program for no applications to be accepted after December 31st, 2027. So it's really intended to jumpstart community revitalization and housing stock over the next several years. But essentially all properties that would meet the qualification criteria that I outlined could apply for that freeze.
Anytime
Am I getting at
until,
your question there? Oh, sorry, Pat, didn't mean to speak.
Yes,
over you.
thanks.
and that's anytime until it sunsets at 27, correct?
That's right. And then that's just when new applications cease. Certainly an application that's taken in 2027, the 5-year freeze would carry through for those 5 years.
So it's literally any time a developer came to town and said, or a individual who might want to renovate property. There's a rolling application that says essentially until 27. So.
That's right.
Councilor Deering.
I'm just going to stump a little bit for it. I mean, I've been following S311 and think that this is right in Barry's wheelhouse. The fact that, if we can offer some support for this with the educational tax being offset and potentially offset also the municipal tax, if that's what we choose to do, it's a win-win for Barry. We build housing, we build, people that are able to work in jobs. They're able to fill positions that we're not able to fill. To be able to put people back into our community when we've seen a decrease in our population, and we constantly talk about, well, how do we bring more people into Barry? We're seeing a lot of opportunities tonight to bring people potentially into Barry without really having to make any serious commitments, other than showing some interest and support in programs. And I'm going to show my support for this program.
Burn Rose.
Hi, thank you. So it's my understanding, what Commissioner Bolio presented is for housing and housing development or housing repairs. And we're looking at primarily the north end, but we have quite a few people that had serious damage in different parts of the city. And the city is also looking at building in those parking lots, are those parking lots that we have in the north end, so that we could utilize this. And if we have people who are trying to rehab their houses, and they're not people who have a lot of money, but they have to invest a lot of money to rehab or to lift up their house, but there's no guarantee to them that they would get this funding, then who does it benefit? It sounds like it just benefits somebody who comes in who has a lot of money up front and is able to make a house or housing someplace, and then have it be, becomes a profit issue that we're supporting. And there's a lot of stuff, and I think that it's a good discussion, and I appreciate that we can respectfully allow people to ask questions, and that if we're going to ask people to vote on things, that we should be able to have the time to ask the questions and understand everything. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to start to answer potentially some of the questions and then ask Commissioner Bolio to weigh in. But as I understand, this legislation or this proposed legislation would enable, or the qualification for towns is within a designated downtown, a TIF district, new neighborhood development area, which Barre has all of those, but they don't cover the north end. They don't cover the 1st through 6th Street, that area. So it was almost like, too bad nobody called Barre when they were drafting the legislation. But so to answer your question, is other parts of Barre would be eligible for this, not just the north end. If the council were to support this legislation, my strong recommendation is that it include language seeking amendment to the legislation to make sure of that north end of Barre is qualifies, because I think the time it would take to redesignate the TIF district or the downtown area, et cetera. But my question to you, Commissioner Bolio, would be, to Byrne's point, we have a number of properties, be they in the north end or be they elsewhere in town, that are now in a blighted condition because of flood impact. Those properties presumably could be eligible were this legislation passed and in place. Is that true?
Yeah, if we could get the language to include those areas, that would be the case. Not something I spoke about tonight, but another piece of a tax incentive that is in that bill that does seem to have some support in the legislature as well is an exemption from property transfer tax when purchasing a blighted property to get restored. So that'll be another way to have, it's not a huge cost savings necessarily in the grand scheme of what that repair might be, but another area to lower costs for those kind of properties. So especially as you start stacking some of these proposals together, you can definitely get some meaningful cost reduction.
Councilor Schaumburg.
I think what I heard was that no other community has used this tool yet, and that this is a proposal from the governor. And how does it fit with the legislature?
So I would, let me answer that in a few ways. So the first question about not being used anywhere. So there's very similar programs in at least a dozen states around the country that use a mechanism like this for targeting development in certain areas, usually residential housing, where they give a property tax exemption or a freeze for a period of a number of years. So it's modeled on those programs that are currently active and available around the country. I would also, again, note it's very similar to existing programs in Vermont, like tax stabilization. There's also a not very frequently used law on the books today that would essentially allow this program on the municipal level for blighted properties. So I would say that this program has been used in other communities around the country, and then also very similar programs around the state. So then your second question was proposal from the governor and how that interacts with the legislature. So it's in two different bills now. The one in the Senate is the one that's moving. So that was voted favorably out of Senate Economic Development. They shortened the period of the freeze in committee from 5 years to 2 years. So certainly the governor and administration would like to see that restored to the original 5. But those are ongoing legislative discussions, and both the administration and legislature and other stakeholders are discussing these proposals and others as a part of S311 and our ongoing housing discussions. Did that get to your question?
Yes, somewhat. I guess where I'm left up in the air is if those two bills don't pass in the legislature this year, what happens?
Yeah,
I mean,
correct.
how does this stand?
Correct. Yeah. So this program would not exist at that point. So I think this is part of why we're here discussing the proposal with the council and asking if perhaps the council would be willing to offer support to that and help with the legislative process.
Exactly. Yeah. We're hoping to get some action on this year so it doesn't fall apart, and so that there are some additional tools in the quiver of any community trying to rebuild from flood or advance new housing.
Councilor Stockwell?
This sounds like a good tool to me. When I talk to homeowners in the North End, I think this would help those homeowners, and it would help other people whose houses are just not in very good shape. So it seems like it's a good win for us, but I would like to ask the city manager and the mayor what their take is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and Councilor Bruno is correct. I misspoke. It's not a loss of revenue. It's a foregone revenue. So I want to correct myself because that was a mischaracterization of a tax freeze. Yeah, I mean, look, anytime there's foregone revenue, it's an opportunity cost. I think this is going to be a total punt on this question, on your question, by the way. So
Good to know.
there's a
Administrative diplomacy.
yeah. So there's foregone revenue. Foregone revenue is an opportunity cost, but then I think that the other opportunity cost is if there is no development, that's also an opportunity cost, right? So my sense is that look, and to your question earlier, Councilor, about what does it mean if there's another flood? The tax, the foregone revenues from a couple of these projects are unlikely to mean the difference for us having to surviving the next flood impact or having to go back to the legislature for more operating money. So my sense is that it's something that may spur development, and sort of like we've done with other approaches, like putting out a letter on Seminary Street. I don't think it hurts anything to see what happens.
And my take is, there's been enough programs mentioned that I'm directly involved in that I have conflicts of interest and would need to recuse myself from this vote. Councilor Lozon.
One last question, Commissioner. As I understand this program, I mean, there are those on the council, understandably so, who are concerned about the city's future revenue. I am as well. I've been talking about it for 6 months. But as I understand this program, as I read 311, they're guardrails. So the 5-year freeze freezes the education property taxes automatically at the pre-construction value. However, as I read 311, the municipalities seem to have a little bit of flexibility. So if, for example, we said here in Barre City, to use your example, Commissioner, where someone purchases a lot for $100,000 and then builds a $1.5 million assessed property, while the education taxes would be frozen at that $100,000 level, I didn't see anything in 311 that would prevent a municipality, because remember, we get the last bite at the apple, folks. This is just a tool. There's nothing in S311 that would prevent a municipality from saying, look, freezing your property taxes at $100,000 is a little too rich for our blood. We've just been through a flood. We're willing to freeze your property taxes at $1 million, and that would be permissible.
Yes. So let me answer that in 2 ways. The first is, by default, there's no foregone revenue for municipalities, right? Because it only freezes the education fund value, the education property taxes. So what you've just described, Counselor, would be you having one of these properties that's frozen, then overlapping a municipal level only tax stabilization on top of that. That would be permissible.
Right.
So
That is
you
not
know,
quite as generous.
correct. Yeah. And again, it's all up to the municipality. The municipality could choose to offer the same freeze, could choose to offer no freeze, or through existing law with tax stabilization, could choose to offer a different stabilized value. But by default, no foregone revenue for municipalities.
Thank you.
I see Steve McKenzie. And then Pat Moulton.
An observation and a comment. Under the status slide, item 2, it says properties must be located in a designated downtown, village center, neighborhood development area, or federal new market tax credit. There's no mention of a TIF district, and I don't know if that's a material omission or not, but I just point that out. And then I think just from an overall perspective, I really think this is a no-brainer. I think the council has nothing to lose by strongly advocating for this position and supporting the rest of the commissioners.
Thanks, Steve. And Pat, also, if you could take an opportunity just to tell us what you're thinking would be the optimal boundaries for a north end definition.
Okay. And thank you. And thank you, Steve McKenzie, for correcting me. You're absolutely right. TIF was not in that legislation, my mistake. And I will raise my hand in part to respond as the commissioner did, that there really is no foregone revenue for Barre unless you make a proactive decision to stabilize or otherwise freeze valuation for those properties for Barre city taxes. But the other thing, you know, this is a tool, this is an incentive, and with respect, and with respect to my friend, City Manager Storelli Castro, I'm not seeing a lot of developers breaking down the door to come to Barre. We want to see that change, and I believe it can change if we have some additional tools in our tool belt, and recognizing that the city itself has limited ability to offer those tools because of all the budget constraints you've been talking about. So this does seem like an opportunity, properly crafted in the legislation, for the city to weigh in and support this. And the boundaries, I've looked at the designated downtown, the village, the neighborhood redevelopment area, and the new market tax credit. And as Councilor Lozon said earlier, the new market tax credit is on the other side of 302, not the residential side. It seems like every zone just kind of skipped that area and of the north end, from sort of 1st through 6th Street and up to Beckley. But I have to believe that were we to do it again, knowing what we know now, that might not have been the case. So, and to your question, Mayor Hemrick, it's really the 1st through 6th Street area that I've been looking at personally, and potentially up to Beckley Street to make sure we're covering that north end, and, you know, potentially beyond 6th Street and including border communities on the sort of north side of 6th Street that I've been looking at. But this really would be a determination for the city to look at. But I think if the language were to be broad and say, if we would ask the legislature to amend this legislation to say add 4 flood affected communities, that doesn't put it out to all 251 towns, nor does it narrow it so much that Barre would not be eligible. Alternatively, you could do something that is such as in or adjacent to a new market tax credit areas, language such as that. But that's in the drafting, and that's what can happen with the commissioner and with legislative council. But I think it's important for this council, should you choose to support this, to get on the record saying you're missing a chunk of our city that needs redevelopment after the flood. So please consider language to expand that. And perhaps if you're willing to endorse this, perhaps the city manager and I could work on a draft letter that would go to the legislature and come to the council for review before sending, if that makes life a little easier. Just looking for ways to kind of move this along for you.
Great. Councilor Booten.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make a motion on the fly to instruct the manager and Pat Moulton to create a letter to the State House to support this legislation and ask to add in there for flood impacted communities. Does that sound good? Okay. Does that sound good?
Yep, it's great.
Okay.
Second.
So, all right.
Excuse me, but could we add a friendly amendment to say flood impacted or landslide impacted?
Oh, so I will
Would that
say
be
the flood,
inclusive?
It
so
complicates it.
flood-related communities keeps it broad to everything in the city. Well, I mean, honestly, because it's communities and hopefully, but I think it would cover that.
Motion and a second. Is that responsive to your question, Councilor Stockwell?
Or could we say whatever they come up with? This
I
works
like that too.
best?
Well, you're drafting the letter. I just want in there specific language that says that specifies flood impacted
Yeah,
communities.
I think that
You got what we're asking.
if I might, I think it could even be more general than that, which is to make just make those portions of the city that were flood impacted eligible for this
Okay.
this incentive.
So now I have to modify my.
No.
No? Okay. Just,
You're good.
you just go forth and
Yeah,
prosper, sir.
I got it.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. We have a couple hands raised. I think Steve McKenzie was first, and then Amy Gelford, and then Councilor Wells.
Yeah, this doesn't go to the motion. I just wanted to be clear with Pat that my comment was in no way intended to be a criticism. It was just, I didn't know if it was an oversight or not, but by no means not a criticism.
It was an oversight. Thank you, Steve.
Amy Gelford.
Yeah, sorry, my hand went up right before Councilor Blumen spoke. I was just wondering how all these different ideas might interact with the citywide assessment. You know, if I look around my neighborhood, I think some of us are at 1/3 of fair market value, some of us are at 2/3 of fair market value, and like our assessments are kind of, even before the flood, they were kind of a mess in terms of consistency. And as I recall, the reassessment got delayed by a year. So I'm just wondering when that fits and how that, because it sort of depends on like, where are we going to freeze things? Are we going to freeze things before the citywide reassessment or after?
So if I'm following the proposal right, that it would be an application to a state agency to for an eligible property to freeze the tax rate for 5 years, based on, I would assume, whatever property valuation is in effect at the time of that application or approval. And all the flood impacted properties have been given the opportunity to be reassessed.
Right.
And our reappraisal timeline is pushed out until 2026.
Yeah.
And I think the legislative implementation timeline on this would be July. Is that right?
Yeah, that's when it would become effective. I'm pulling in my memory in the language that I don't have in front of me what the provision is for that. We did consider that because you're saying, so the value is frozen, but then there's a citywide reassessment. What does that do to the value? I believe, and I apologize if I have this wrong, but I believe the mechanism for that is that the frozen value would simply be divided by the townwide CLA at that point, so that the tax bill for that property would remain the same post reappraisal.
Okay, I'm just curious how that fits because it just seems like there's going to be a lot going on. So
I believe that
yeah.
language is in there, but I'm not 100% certain.
I have no idea what the right thing is to do. I just remembered that we're supposed to have a reassessment in the middle of it.
Councilor Wells,
I hope Amy runs for office someday because she always asks really good questions. So my question for potentially the commissioner is taking a step back outside of municipal funds in the city of Barre and looking at statewide. Certain properties get frozen at pre-development so that they don't keep up with their actual fair market value for 5 years. The costs of education are not frozen and will continue to go up. So then it'll be up to the legislature to figure out how to fill that gap. Is that a accurate, if simplistic, way to say it?
I think that that is generally an accurate, simplified way. Yeah, it'll fall to the rest of the education fund, which would be the rest of statewide property taxpayers. I'm happy to say for fiscal year 25 and 26, because the program has sort of a ramp up, right? You have to get the units online and you have to actually be using it as the long-term rental or owner occupied. It's a very modest cost estimate statewide for the education fund. I believe it's $1 million for fiscal year 25 and less than 2 for fiscal year 26, maybe $1.5 million. So it's not a program that has a significant cost over this year, which certainly there are a lot of pressures in the ed fund or next year. And so that's one of the things that has made it attractive to us. And it comes, right, depending on which town you're in, a 5-year freeze can be between 7 and 9% cost reduction. In Barre, with the education tax rate, I think it's a little over 8.5%, right? So if you get a number of units statewide that's similar to that cost reduction, you could be talking a couple hundred units a year, which will have its own organic grand list growth after the 5-year freeze as well. So we're seeing it as one of the tools to help the long-term problem in the education fund, which is not having enough tax base, not having enough organic grand list growth, certainly in the areas of residential property.
So, I think the point remains, though, that the legislature will have to raise taxes to keep up with the cost of education, given the foregone revenue that would come as a result of this problem, or excuse me, of this program. And with all due respect, the governor has made no secret in the press and in his public statements his disdain for the legislature in their having to raise taxes to keep up with the costs of the education fund and state government, including putting out what I consider to be a scare tactic of a press release, condemning the legislature for passing a tax on individuals over $500,000 in annual income, while he, through the commissioners and Pat, is here asking for continued foregone revenue for the ed fund, which he will then yell at the legislature for when they have to raise taxes to make up for that. So I will be voting no on this one.
I think the comment I'd make there is that the ed fund is a self-balancing fund, right? So the ed fund needs to raise the amount of property tax it needs to raise either way. And so it won't necessarily be more or less. It's just, it does move those costs to the rest of property taxpayers. From my perspective, again, with a very modest cost for fiscal year 25 and 26, the impact that gets moved to other property taxpayers is extremely modest. To be able to use one of the effective tools for organic grand list growth and getting more houses in Vermont.
Pat?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, and Commissioner Bolio kind of hit the nail on the head for me. It is about trying to grow housing, because clearly we would not be in this place where we are now statewide of a lack of housing had there not been some changes made prior to now. So while I appreciate Councilor Wozniak, I'm never gonna get it right.
That's
I
okay.
appreciate Teddy's perspective, and it is foregone revenue, but it's a 5-year period. And then there'll be substantial new revenue coming into the education fund by the new development that's occurred that probably would not have occurred otherwise without these incentives. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind many times is these incentives are needed to be it create housing, create jobs, et cetera, in Vermont. And then eventually 5, 10, 15 years, depending on the period, we get that revenue that we might not have otherwise seen.
Yeah, and I misspoke briefly. It does, because it is the foregone revenue, it will not increase the cost line in the education fund. That's correct, but you are correct. It would increase the aggregated property taxes that have to be raised.
So we have a motion and a second, right? And
we do.
and
Just to support this.
Yes.
Yes, to support this.
To
So-
instruct, what I have is instruct the manager and Ms. Moulton to draft a letter to the legislature and be sure to include language that the flood impacted communities are referenced in the bill.
I'm sorry, I heard the motion wrong and I seconded it. I understood it was a letter of support.
Sorry, letter of support.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion on this item, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed,
No.
and I am recusal, abstention, whatever. is the right-
Wish we had done it 5 years ago, Pat. Thanks.
So that takes us back to the TIF district and the north end. Councilor Lozon.
Thank you very much. We just had a discussion framed around this 5-year freeze program, which council has decided to support. So thank you very much for that. But we need more tools. I mean, as I look at the north end, I don't care if it's an NDA. I don't care if it's a TIF district. We have your new markets tax credit eligible. Unfortunately, it's on the wrong side of Route 302. So the Beckley Hill side of 302 is not new markets tax credit eligible. So as you just heard the commissioner say, there are very, very few tools, few programs that the north end is qualified for. So this is an ask of the legislature to change that. Personally, I think a TIF district would work best. Nicholas and I, city manager and I were having a brief discussion this afternoon about the anticipated cost of some flood resiliency methods once we complete some of the buyouts along the Stevens Branch. We'll get FEMA funds for the buyouts. We will not get FEMA funds to tear the buildings down and to do meaningful flood mitigation. That's exactly what a TIF district does. Mayor, you mentioned earlier that some of the pretty things that we see around the city, some of the landscape changes, well, that's what we did in our existing TIF district. We did some infrastructure that you don't see. We did the Enterprise Alley parking lot. We did the pedway in between down by AR Market, Pearl Street Pizza. Obviously, city's north end is going to be very different. And we're going to require, in order to affect meaningful flood resiliency measures, it's going to require some bonding. It's not something that we are going to be able to pay for. So as I look at what a TIF district could do in the north end, it could enable the city, when you look at the discussions that we've had around rebuilding in the north end and the types of housing we might have, we always talk about a big green space, a place where floodwaters could settle so that it doesn't flood the neighborhoods. There are grants out there, but those grants are likely, I don't know how many years away. And if we had a TIF district or an NDA, it doesn't matter, either or, we would enable the north end to qualify for some of those programs.
Councilor Booten.
We can use TIF funds to purchase property and
Yeah,
Okay.
we can use it to purchase
just pointing
property,
that out.
prepare
If-
it for site preparation, hazardous waste mitigation.
Just pointing that out as we talk about buyouts and where we're going to get money. That being said, I don't have a problem making a motion to support this idea.
Could I add one thing, Mayor? Because you're very familiar with the TIF programs. I realize after our conversation, not everyone is. I know you're very familiar with it. I'm not proposing that we circumvent the rules at all. I simply want specific legislative appointment saying the city's north end will get a TIF district. I'm not, as you know, there's a lot that goes into a TIF district application. So I'm not proposing that those rules are totally waived. I just want to make sure that we are guaranteed, so that moving forward, as we move forward for the next 12 months, next 2 years, we know we have a TIF district, because you know the time that it takes to put a TIF district application together. It's a lot of time, and Carol, you certainly know. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. It would serve the city well if we had specific legislative approval saying the city of Barre will have a TIF district in the north end.
And the only thing that we have, the only hurdle we have at this stage of the game is the legislative prescription against having more than one.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at doing. Yeah.
But you know what?
So I
We
see
got
some
hit
hands
worse than
raised,
anybody.
Counselor Wozniak and then Counselor Stockwell.
I was gonna steal Michael's thunder and make the motion. I didn't know if the first one ended up going through.
Counselor Stockwell?
I just wonder if it's worth it to look or to get more information, like which would be more beneficial. In a neighborhood development area, you do get priority consideration for state grants. You get a discount for Act 250, you get a wastewater fee cap, you get tax credits. Is it worth getting more information or asking someone else to say, hey, going forward, which would help us most?
I don't
We
think
ask
so.
the city
NDA
manager.
doesn't have the programs that TIF has. TIF is much more powerful.
Excuse me.
Yeah, so let's talk in order. As recognized, Counselor Booton.
I'll just make that comment that I made before, which is we can use TIF funds to purchase property and package it up for a developer. And considering the properties down there, and we've had discussions about this, if we give it to FEMA or if we do it through FEMA, that property's off it's off. There's no way we'll ever get it back. So that's the reason why I support the TIF option, and I hope that other counselors would consider to do that as well. And once again, you know, I don't want to use this analogy, but I'm going to, you know, if you see the cookie jar and you're asking for a cookie, doesn't mean you're going to get it, but I can guarantee you won't get it if you don't ask for it.
I just want to clarify that I'm not asking about FEMA buyouts. I'm asking about, is this a better tool than a TIF district? I don't know the answer to that, but probably somebody does.
Yeah, I would say that just to be clear, I'm a co-manager of the Neighborhood Development Area Program. It's a very different program than tax increment financing, but it is an incentive benefits district that the city does not have right now and could have, and the Planning Commission's been talking about it for several years. And the Housing Task Force has recommended that the Planning Commission work on that. I do think we need to be realistic about staff capacity with a request like this, because TIF districts are extremely labor intensive. And I think I don't see that there's capacity in our municipal government right now. And I also think, like, if we can exhaust other less complicated money, that should always be our go-to first. But I mean, to Tom's point, though, he's looking to have another tool in the toolbox. I think the question for me is it one we need right now, and if the rest of the tax base isn't keeping up, like we already have one TIF district that the increment's set aside for. We set up another, say there's an authority to set up another TIF district, and then that increment's taken off the books. And then there are other flood impacted properties that have taxes stabilized for 5 years. Meanwhile, our costs are going up. Maybe the rest of the grand list could be going down or is not keeping up or may not keep up in pace at the same ratio of development. We could be in pretty hot water. The other thing is, if a TIF district fails, and they have in the state of Vermont, those bonds, everybody's responsible for those bonds. It all hinges on development happening on the other end. And if that doesn't happen, there is a risk there. Now, the state's role is to try to mitigate that risk through its approval processes, but it's not without risk. I just look at our prime TIF district, our downtown, and I think we should try to maximize that as much as we can, given that we already have some increment to use. We only have so much staff capacity, and that's just where my preference would be. And I think there's some other good ideas in the mix here that could support that. Councillor Chambel, and then Councillor Deering was first, and then Councillor Chambel. Yeah.
So what I've seen tonight is that we have a lot of opportunities to potentially build housing. And I see that we have a lot of uncertainty in how we're going to move forward in that. And that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. But what I've also seen is that we're not making any concrete decisions about, yes, we're going to use this for a project or not. What I see is that we're trying to arm ourselves with a bunch of tools in order to rebuild our community after some serious devastation. Now, no one has advocated for a specific tool to be used in any particular development or project, but what people have advocated for is having the different tools that when we need them, we can use them. So very similar to this program is like others, that if it's there and we have a need for it and we can use it in the most appropriate, responsible way, then I don't see why we shouldn't support it. And I think that when we're not supporting housing initiatives and ways that we can build housing, that we're not doing our city any justice by trying to build that grand list we talk about trying to build that value back up, whether it's in a 5-year freeze or a 10-year freeze. If we don't build it, we're never going to see the income come back. And when we're talking about rebuilding, we're talking about rebuilding more flood resilient. We're talking about building back properties and developments where the next time things get flooded, it's not just, hey, the property got wiped out. It's, hey, we have this property as a foundation for our community. So I look at these programs as ways that we can build our foundation while we're supporting our communities and moving forward.
Councilor Shambo?
If this were specified as a TIF district, do you have to use it? You could just let it run out and do nothing.
It'd be at the
Or does
discretion
that
of
make
council,
still
right?
for a lot of?
You incur no debt without a full vote of the city. So that is correct.
So
When you form the TIF district and you set your plan, there is a citywide vote. And if the citizens don't want to invest in their city, then the city council can't. It's not something that the city council, it's very unlike property tax stabilization where, the city council can, on their own, without their constituents' vote, accept a property tax stabilization agreement. TIF doesn't work that way. It's, as I said, it's just another tool because right now we got one prayer: grants. They're pretty competitive, and as the mayor has pointed out correctly, many, many times we don't have the staff capacity to even apply for grants. So this gives the city the ability to try to attract development and to use that tax increment to pay for infrastructure improvements that, hey, guess what? We're going to pay for anyway.
Does the staff not have capacity for this?
For TIF? The staff capacity plan for TIF is to hire a TIF consultant when she retires. Clerk Dawes has been managing it now on a day-to-day basis and
10+ years.
for a long time, and that would be the plan moving forward.
Is there a line in the budget for that?
It's covered by increment.
One last question, Mayor.
Councilor Lozon?
Clerk Dawes, I trust you. You sit here unbiased. You remember what it was like. We faced a lot of the same questions when we did TIF originally.
Yep.
Worth it or not?
I believe it's worth it 100%. I support what we've done, the $2.2 million worth of public improvements that we've done to date with the TIF district. It actually leveraged about $6 million worth of other funding sources. So we did considerably more work than the 2.2 million that the community invested. We're exploring other opportunities for the rest of the capacity that we have in our current TIF district. It's been mentioned numerous times by Commissioner Bolio, by other people sitting here. These are all tools, and I'm a firm believer that the more tools we have in our toolbox, the better. Not every tool is going to be the right fit for every project, but the more opportunities we have to fine tune a project to what we have for available tools, the better off we are. All of these go towards building the grand list. Everything from the 250,000 that the council has invested in the North End, the Northbury, the Ward 9 school, the 250,000 council approved at the last meeting for the revolving loan fund. These are also tools that the council has already acted on. These are just more tools, whether it's the proposed TIF district, whether it's the frozen ed fund program. They're all tools, and everyone gives us more options.
Thank you. And Councilor Stockwell, an NDA can exist within a TIF and vice versa.
There's a motion and a second. If there's no,
Did I get a second?
I had two
I'll second it.
motions, so I will give Counselor Wozniak the motion and Counselor Booton the second, because they both, there we go.
and I didn't hear Councilor Wozniak's motion. I heard Councilor Booton's motion. What's your motion, Councilor Wozniak?
Whatever, Council.
He
To ask the legislature to do
I
the
recall him
thing.
saying, I want to steal his thunder.
Yes, my motion is to steal Councilor Booton's thunder. Permanently.
So the motion is?
Yeah, let's get the motion on
The
the table.
motion is to support the ask of the legislature to create a second TIF district within the North End.
So there's a motion second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries.
And do you want your vote recorded, or do you want a recusal recorded? Do you have a preference? Do you just want to be silence is consent?
Silence is consent.
Okay,
So,
perfect.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking there. So, yeah, and to be clear, I don't manage anything related to TIF. So that takes us to back to the tax stabilization within a TIF district proposal. And
We can do those another time. I mean,
well, let's just get through it. We're
okay,
here.
we're 2 hours into it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is how it was set up, so it's going to be a long meeting. So we have a proposal to stabilize within the TIF and
Yeah.
to be held harmless. We still have a motion on the table. Is there any further discussion based on what we've heard so far?
Tools in the basket.
All right, so there's a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, I'm a nay. Motion carries. And that takes us to items.
Well, no, I
I
think
did
Mel
too.
did
Oh,
too.
Mel did too. Okay. Do you want to split the question? or-
Yeah,
Okay,
let's-
Councilor Booton,
Aye.
Councilor Chambel.
Say what?
He
Roll
called
call.
for division, so. Councilor Booton called for a division to record
means-
individual votes.
Right, so we're just.
I said nay.
Councilor Deering.
Yay.
Councilor Lozon.
That was a yes.
Councilor Stockwell.
Nay.
Councilor Wozniak.
Aye.
And I'm a nay.
So it
So
passes.
that's. So that takes us to the next item, which is so we've gone through 1, 2, 3 is to discuss prospective congressionally directed spending projects. I got an email, I'm sure most of you got an email from Senator Sanders' staff just advertising the awards that were made for last round and talking about projects for this round. It seems to be rather flexible funding in substantial amounts that could be used for housing. We've been talking about housing a lot. I have the understanding, based on just conversations I've had with people this week, that it is in our best interest to try to package flexible projects, and not just one project, but give a menu of items to enhance our potential competitiveness. And so I thought this would be an opportunity to think about supports for the Seminary Street project, which we know is probably the nearest term, fastest route to a certificate of occupancy for a new dwelling unit we have right now, is likely going to have costs associated with infrastructure. And we have letters of interest from developers. I also understand that this application is this pre-application form is very straightforward and easy. Shouldn't take more than an hour to package up projects such as. And so I would put before the council whether or not you want to show support for some housing ideas. And I know we have a couple in the mix to forward to the senator's office. So, Councilor Stockwell.
I think housing would be great, especially would help the housing happen faster. But I also think about DPW and the need for a garage and additional river mitigation. I think like there's VEM funding for river mitigation, and there's some grants available, and there's raising the bridges, and DPW sort of as a bleeding raw wound. So how much can we ask for? Only one thing?
Well, if you've seen our deficit, national deficit, I'd say open checkbook.
Until you see that
I'd say like anything.
So, manager.
So we've, in the past, we were just talking about this, we've asked for multiple grants in the past, and we were awarded multiple grants in the past. The one that, I know Tessa's been working on some of the housing specifics pieces of it. We've also been working at the staff level on, which we understand is eligible from Sanders' office, is the other part of the match for the odd, which would allow us to, we've checked, and they've said that it would be possible to request a CDS, Congressional Directed Spending earmark for the 45% match. We think that's, right now, there's not a specific public works project, so I think this one would take, it'd be a 2.8 million need plus probably at this point because the project's a couple years old, but it would relieve some of our need to find that match, and it's a basically shovel ready project.
The Banwell Architects, where are they right now? What are they up to?
They don't have a direction at this point from us. We've been the plan that we had been working on the day of the flood was to rethink the current site, which obviously the flood taught us was not possible. So we're kicking tires on locations, but we don't have, what I would hesitate doing a congressionally directed spending project on that at this point is that we don't have a specific project for them to look at.
Councilor Wozniak?
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about the DPW thing, so I was thinking of just blanket money for redevelopment and how.
Feasibility, so.
Yeah, it's worth, if we're gonna send a letter for CDA, like, we might as well throw in something for the DPW stuff, I think. Odd's a good idea, and I think we should just put together a package of the big ticket things we're working on, the couple housing development sites that we've already identified, the odd and DPW, and just see what the senator can get us.
Councilor Deering?
Side note, what about the roof at the BOR?
Yeah, that's also a big ticket item. I think that one's probably less imminent.
Right.
At this point, I would save that one for a future round.
I just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amy Gelford.
I just wondered, is Barre eligible for a waiver on any of the local matches rather than having to ask for a second CDS to?
Not for the odd money.
Okay, I guess it varies by the federal appropriation.
I know the EPA grants, we've tended to be eligible for waivers. So I think, for example, for the 302 money, we got a lower waiver. That one's the match on that's only 20%. I believe part of that was driven by community need. But this
That's actually the standard waiver for.
So maybe not then.
Yeah. Source. Yeah.
So maybe not then. Yeah. So not then. But the odd money is it's USDA loan now, and we've asked them about that, and this was the match we needed to come up with.
Okay, that's a weird way to have to do it, but everyone seems to have different.
I do support Councilor Wozniak's approach to package things up and give them a menu of options, which could have traction, including some sort of site feasibility study analysis for the public works garage, to continue to look at sites.
Sorry, due date was?
It's April 8th at 5 p.m.
we got tons of
Got
time.
tons of time, so.
So I would,
But, I mean, I'd volunteer for it if you need volunteer, but Counselor Wozniak, yeah.
so we can redirect, but for sake of starting the conversation, make a motion to instruct the manager to assemble a list of the highest priority, high dollar projects that need to be done in the city and submit them to Senator Sanders' office as
Second.
CDS.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on that?
And that will include the housing and flood mitigation?
Yep,
Teddy?
yeah,
It will,
yeah, and
okay.
I think just
want to make
because
sure.
we're, no, totally, and I think just as we're coming up
Yeah.
against this deadline, anything we get is going to be hugely helpful.
Perfect.
And I trust the manager to make the decisions as to what
Yeah.
should be prioritized in that.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. The next is just a discussion of some of the activities. Specifically, I think we're most interested in the housing-related projects that are before the Planning Commission. And I had, I think, followed suit with Councilor Lozon in suggesting that maybe meeting more would help with productivity without thinking through the staff impacts of that, which the manager made clear he does not support the Planning Commission meeting twice a month. I know they've had a couple months where they've had to have some cancellations, and this council has been talking about the extent to which Janet has been overextended in filling vacancies for a long time and trying to reach for particular ways to better support her department, and make sure that things are moving through the Planning Commission. And so my interest in putting this item on the agenda was, one, to make sure that council's aware of some of the activities and work that's on the Planning Commission's plate. And some of those are activities that cannot begin in council, like amendments to the Unified Development Regulations cannot begin at council, nor can plan amendments, nor can amendments to the flood hazard regulations. And so, or the, planning for streetscape that could feed into a TIF project. Those are all things that are on the Planning Commission's plate right now. So I'm putting this item out there in hopes that there can be an opportunity to find some win-wins, either, and that might be looking at the budget for the planning position and making sure that it's realistically budgeted to fill it. It could be that the commission takes on a stronger volunteer role, like a lot of volunteer planning commissions throughout the state, and they are lifting a little bit more work off of staff. It could, there could be a variety of solutions. So if David Sickle, if you're amenable, or Janet, just to giving us an update on some of the things that are happening and maybe opportunities to for the council to and Janet to work to meet the needs. This is an opportunity for that.
Do you want to speak, Janet, or would you like me to?
You feel free to start. I
will start. Yeah, I think the Planning Commission has been challenged by a lack of staff capacity to do some of the things we've talked about, and just some unfortunate things relating to meetings having to be canceled. I think what is coming up at the meeting that Janet and I talked about this agenda is there will be some flood mitigation language that the commission will be working on, and I gave her some draft language of a few changes, which I think she also had the same things in mind in talking to the manager. I think they're fairly simple changes that would help move things forward, and also talked about strategies about whether there's a way to get it to City Council sooner rather than later as far as a hearing process. So that will be on the agenda for this next meeting, as well as language relating to the zoning ordinance and a number of adjusting the lot sizes to comply with the new state statute, as well as trying to allow
more units to be built on vacant lots or developed on, added to existing buildings. Once the commission agrees on language, then we can warn a public hearing and get that process moving for an interim zoning change. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the grant things going on, Janet, perhaps?
Sure. The Planning Commission about a year and a half ago asked me to apply for 2 grants, which I did and was surprisingly awarded. One was a bylaw modernization grant, which allows us to hire a consultant to help update the zoning. And the other one was a planning grant to actually update the 2012 North Main to Summer Street plan. Both RFPs were solicited, spread everywhere to get to people, sent directly to consultants, and no consultant responded to our bylaw modernization grant RFP. And only one responded to our planning grant RFP. And I didn't get their contract until almost Thanksgiving. So then we had a catastrophic flood. So things have slowed down. They're not totally off the table, but slowed down incredibly. Both grants actually have a expiration date of January 31st of 2025. I have asked staff in the ACCD office via email if there's an opportunity to extend those grants at all. And if so, I will be submitting letters, formal letters of request. If there isn't, we have to get creative and see if I can find somebody that was willing to step up and help us in the next 9 months. So we don't lose an opportunity on the bylaw grant. I've been in communication with VHB. They're the consultant that actually applied for and was awarded the planning grant to do the North Main to Summer Street. And he and I actually, the gentleman the consultant I'm working with, we're going to be speaking day after tomorrow. So there's a lot going on. I can speak to a neighborhood development area district. That's something that I've wanted to do close to 8 years now. I actually met with someone who worked in the ACCD office and got the preliminary meeting out of the way. And interestingly, at the time, neighborhood development looked like Swiss cheese all over the city because it's based on topography and height of land. And it was about being creative as to whether we could link those bubbles together or not. Like I said, that was years ago, and I have been asked through the housing task force to do something about a neighborhood development district, which certainly is on the Planning Commission's agenda. Working agenda and to-do list.
Janet, do you know if, thanks for that update. Do you know if CVRPC has any like planner assistance they could extend to you, or like, I know Claire Rock recently left and is doing private consulting planning. Do you think that would be beneficial or just more another thing to manage?
In other words, CVRPC did not respond to our RFP at the time. I can certainly reach out to the executive director again to see if he thinks his staff has capacity, but I know, being on the executive committee of the Regional Planning Commission, they're stretched pretty thin as well. And that's in partnership with no consultant responded to our bylaw mod grant RFP, which is pretty frustrating. You put in the work to get a grant and you get awarded, and the consultants are so busy everywhere. But I'll keep trying.
Councilor Stockwell?
Is there anything we can do to help? Is there anything we could give you to help get more of the work done? I know we don't have a magic wand, but
no,
would anything be useful?
Well, I would love a planner, right? Can we afford a planner at the mayor's suggestion? That I don't know. That would be a budgetary item that the manager and the assistant manager would have to talk about. I have wanted somebody in my office to help for a very long time. You know that for 3 years, I was essentially by myself. So we would love people to come to work at Barre City. I don't know why people don't. It's a great little city.
Yeah, I know you were the everything.
I guess let's just spread some joy about how wonderful we are, okay?
See what I could do.
There you go.
If there's no other questions about updates, really appreciate you taking the time to provide an update, and that will perhaps be useful as we pivot to our budget discussion. That takes us to the FY25 budget update.
All right. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, David. So council, the packet included a presentation which was nearly identical to the one we showed last week. And I can, unless anyone really wants to hear it again, I can fly to the slide that's different.
That's a slide.
So we didn't make any changes since we talked to you last week. The only thing that's really open at this point is the request from the Homelessness Task Force. Just as a reminder, their request was $18,000 for 6 accessible portable toilets to be deployed through the city on a year-round basis. I'm joining the task force's meeting tomorrow night to discuss this proposal. We did a little homework. We identified a better rate, which for the 6 portables plus extra cleaning would cost only $12,600. I still think that the questions we'd asked of the task force are important, and I look forward to discussing it with them. But I don't know if 6 is the right number. I think we have, the public safety building has a bathroom that's in the non-secure part of the building that if somebody were in need of a facility in that neighborhood, that would be a place for them to go. City Hall is accessible throughout the day as well. And so, so there's already 2 locations there. I think if we started, sort of phasing something out to see how it went and how the uses went, that might be a place to start. I think the other question would be helpful for me and Don as we come to you on the 11th. We'll have to lock in a number for the town meeting day ballot. So as I meet with the task force tomorrow, something that would be helpful for me and then for me and Don to implement is, assuming we move forward, is this something that the council would like to do with new money or offset it with some other costs, with some other expenses in the budget? So that would be, I think, helpful direction. Don, is there anything else that you think we need other than that?
Yeah, so I would like to hold off on making a final decision here until you're able to meet with the task force tomorrow. Like I said, where did the number 6 come from? So we have the what I'll call the Barre Up one, and the public safety building, but obviously these buildings are closed and not accessible. It's all 24/7. So, perhaps that we have 2 of them, one down by the Labor Hall and one near Courier Park, so that folks do have other options, and that 2 or 3 would not cost as much as the 12.6. But to answer your direct question, I would advocate for just adding it into the new money in the request from the voters, and rather than playing the game of where are we going to find, let's say, $10,000 in additional cuts, I would just, it's not a back-breaking amount of money to add on to the request of the voters. So that would be my personal preference.
Mr. Stockwell?
But you could also check and see if 4 toilets would be a place to start. And I would not put them in really out of the way places. I don't think that's a wise move. The other thing is that they're cleaned regularly. Part of the contract is a weekly cleaning. So in fact, if they're being overused, we would know that we need more. If they're being underused, it would be like a trial. And I know that Barre Congregational Church was willing to give them some money towards porta toilets. It's a long time from when this conversation first started, but it's a place for them to check out.
Just a question regarding the warming shelter we didn't use this year. Is it possible that we could offset those costs from the warming shelter? I know that we're looking to do it next year, but in the event that we can't get that to fruition.
So if we're talking about 25, which would start July 1, that would have to be either new money or foregoing a warming shelter for the next year. You're correct, we didn't have anyone take us up on the warming shelter this year, but as Don reminds me, that money is spent anyway on flood stuff. So, is it technically there because we didn't spend it? Technically, yes, but also realistically, it's out the door.
Understandable. Thank you.
Yeah, it'd be like Councilor Wozniak, and I mean, instead of having to try to go through, I mean, we could go through every single fund, thing line that was restored and look at that, but sounds like maybe if you could come back with a potential middle way, that'd be helpful. So.
And it could be none at all. It could be that, years ago, we had welcome centers in the city, and they would receive stipends, not only for to maintain public restrooms, but also to provide information to people. So there could be organizations around the city who would say, look, for a few $1,000s a year, it works for everybody. We'll allow our restroom to be public, and it also supports our mission. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion.
But but what I'm hearing, Councilor Lozon, is that there is interest in
Oh, I'm okay with
some
that.
money for this purpose.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So there's that. Is there anything that you did want to bring to our attention related to cut restorations before I raise the issue of the planner?
No, I mean, I think I think we've gotten to a good product. This is where it landed, and we would not be here in this having such a relatively easier conversation without that $1 million in state funding. So I think that tonight's agenda items really, if there are any big questions about the budget, like we'd like to do them tonight, because on Thursday we have to warn a final budget, so it'll be harder to.
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday, yes, thank you, Councilor. So it'd be better to have some lead time into that, so that we're not trying to do it at the last second, but yeah, ready for any of those types of questions. We didn't need any other data point, and unfortunately, since I don't meet with the task force till tomorrow, I didn't have any updates about the open issue that we know of.
The one thing that I would ask that you look at is there a way to increase the compensation for an assistant planner that would be below a department head salary, but higher than it is right now, without affecting the projected income tax or projected tax rate increase by looking at trimming in other areas?
Yes, although the operating question there is what do we trim, right? That's
yeah. I mean, if you want to go through line by line, we can do it. We can do it that type of thing. But I'd prefer to. And what I'm asking is that be a consideration, because we've done this. We've done this dance for 2 years, and I'll be very honest. I'm just been frustrated by it, because I went and spoke to voters and went to bat on front porches saying, if we have a planner, we're going to be able to draw down money. We're going to be able to manage grants. We're going to be able to jump ahead of projects. And for 2 years, that position has remained unfilled and got absorbed into other areas. And we have a planning director who's feeling very frazzled and overworked and needs support. And so I'm just really asking that I think this budget needs to realistically budget for that, if that is truly a priority.
Yeah, I'm with you, but how do we, I mean, literally, do we start recruiting at colleges? Do we call every college in a 600-mile radius and say, maybe we'll try it that way? We'll try to find a recent graduate who would be willing to come to Barre, Vermont to gain some valuable experience and is young and full of energy. I don't know.
Like Josh
I mean,
Schwartz, right? Yeah,
it doesn't, the frustrating thing, and I share your frustration, is we don't even get to go to bat. We're not striking out. We're not even standing at the plate. We're not even getting people to apply.
Because we haven't budgeted for it.
Well, there is a salary range, but even with the salary range, I'm not sure that even raising it, I don't know. I'm as frustrated as you are. I'd love to see some more. I don't know.
I mean, I think that when I think about this position, I think about how my career started, which is I took a position that paid less to go work in the legislature because I knew that I would be doing real work related to my degree as opposed to working at a lobbying firm where I'd be making copies and running errands for a partner. I think of this position being interesting to somebody like that who's graduating college and would like to do some real planning instead of going to a planning consulting firm and also, copy editing reports and not doing real work. So I think it could be I think that's our market is a college level person. The challenge is, and I don't think they're specific to Barre. One of them is salary, which we do have control over. The other one's housing, which we're trying to do something about. But for us, recruiting anywhere that's not driving distance away is pretty much impossible. Am I the last person who came to work who didn't live here? Probably. And that was hard to do. So, it's not like we can recruit in Connecticut and Massachusetts. We're recruiting in Washington County and maybe Burlington, and that's the people who might come to work here. So I think this notion that we're not doing enough is missing the scale that we're recruiting in, which is extremely limited for us. We're not going to find a planner from Colorado to come and take a job here because they probably have nowhere to move.
You could stay with you for a little while.
They could, yeah.
For the team, Nicholas.
For the team.
Well, I think anything to do to support that, because I do believe there's solutions. I watched those job ads being in that space. I'm familiar with that. Never want to overstep into your role, but I think like Councilor Lozon beating the bushes for the assessor, perhaps that might be what we need to do a little bit more. And I do think that $50,000, as if I have the number right, is
55, yeah.
55.
It's not much more, but yeah, there's not much more. But yeah, I think, and yeah, on the assessor, we were budgeted for a full-time assessor for less money, and we paid more money and got a quarter-time assessor. So those are the kind of trade-offs that we have to think about. I mean, I think that, one other thing is, do we look at the soft skills of a person, right? Someone who comes in with intangible soft skills that we can mold and train and do maybe and learn on the fly. Like that might be something that we pivot to as well. I mean, we can certainly try to elevate the salary. Realistically, are we gonna, most planners are probably making, some probably more than me. So whether we are able to recruit even by raising it to below department head level is probably may not solve it either.
Can't hurt.
It can't hurt. No, absolutely. But it may not be it might not resolve it.
Councilor Jerry.
Is there a possibility for a sign-on bonus? I mean, I'm just kind of throwing things out there.
Yeah. I mean, those are all tools that we could use should a candidate come. I mean, I think what we could do is advertise it at a higher level is one thing, or we can put the money in. I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying that either impacts this number down below, or and Don and I are not happy, but Don and I can go back and find the offsets if that's what council wants. I mean, we have a whole list of offsets that we can go back to that equal the 20,000 more that we might add to a position. So we don't necessarily even need, if council's comfortable with me and Don going through the list and adding up what it means to raise the salary from the cuts that we've considered before, that's something we can do. I guess our question would be, A, do you want to increase it? And B, if we do increase, the same question as we had with the portables, are we just adding to the 4.85% projected tax rate increase, or are we offsetting it? And then if we're offsetting it, are you offsetting it, or me Don and I offsetting it. I guess it's a three-part question.
So who wants to take a stab at that? Counselor Wozniak.
There's always that pesky police department overtime.
Yeah, there is.
I know.
Yeah,
but
It doesn't need to be officers to reduce the overtime.
Yeah, that's, I mean, and that's
a yes and.
that was that was restored here because and the police chief is right there with us. He wants to reduce overtime, and he has strategies for doing so. And we were going to take those savings. We were going to realize those savings, but as we've gotten through the year, they're just not materializing because of they have 5 vacancies. So, and most of them are hitting a specific shift, second shift.
Yes.
And so that's just tying our hands. I mean, go ahead.
I was gonna say, even if we did have candidates to the table, they're a year out.
Yeah, they have to go
Yeah.
through the academy.
Right, so it's not on this budget. We're gonna be
Yeah.
in 25, I think.
I agree. But budgeting for it.
That's a fool's errand.
I know, Carol's giving it a stink.
We've been down that road so many times where we've said, let's take it out of salt, let's take it out of overtime, and because it's just a number on a spreadsheet, but then when you have to live with the realities.
I mean, and it's a realistic situation. I mean, if the council wishes to increase it, and the council wishes to offset it, Don and I can go through and choose the highlighted restorations here and go through the least painful ones until we offset it. I mean, that's we went through that before. We can do it again. It's really a question of your collective will.
You presented the budget with that number. I'd prefer to stick with your number. If we have to make a different decision, we have, it's not like we don't have resources. So if someone, even if we tried some new recruiting measures and they don't work, we could always throw $20,000 at the position. It's not like we have ARPA funds, we have other resources for something that's kind of key to the city's future, certainly for the next 5 years when we all have to be looking 5 years down the road, we could find it. So you put this budget together, you did a good job. I just soon leave it alone. Wasn't joking, Don, when I said, I know you've done it. So have I. You've looked at next year. Yeah. I mean, I would really be interested in and not something this thick, but literally just like that one pager. So here are our variables. We know salaries are going to go up X. We know healthcare is going to go up Y. So here's the resulting, here's the decrease in grand list that we expect. Here's the resulting tax rate. You've done it, haven't you? So have I. And then I put it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it ruined the weekend. No, but
We know
we got to
it's
do
going to
it.
come, and that's going to be council's duty in September.
Yep, I'll be here.
Yeah.
Is there something else we can do that's not money, that would be an incentive to work here? I was thinking like housing. Can we give them an abandoned house? Here's your very own vacant house. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's limited. I mean, those things are, all those incentives, they cost money, right? So we try to do, and Don and I spend time on this, trying to find sort of cost-free incentives for the staff that are perks of working here. But, it's hard to do them at no cost, right? So we try to give people, one free one we can do is give them some schedule flexibility, right? And that's something we try to do. It doesn't cost us money as long as we keep getting the output. That's something that we can offer with, through supervisors. But doing anything with cost just is difficult.
Okay.
I've said it before. I'm a big fan of finding people that may not have that college education and developing them. I think that's one way to help with poverty rates that we always talk about, helping people to get that education while on the job. And quite frankly, I think that on-the-job training is far better than any amount of time you can spend in a college.
I think anyone, and that's where I think the appeal is, that anyone who, they'd be doing some real work here immediately.
Yep.
There's no fluff work here to be done, especially in that office. So, and that's why I do think back to, like I said, where my career started, which is you take the less money, but you're doing like real work right away, and in your field, which is, not everyone gets to do.
And this would be a union position? No.
No.
Okay, right.
No.
So there's a little bit more latitude in
Yeah.
terms of like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you were to do a 3/4 time or something like that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Why wouldn't this be? Is it a management?
Because they make no, that's the zoning admin makes semi-judicial decisions. It's just not contained in the bargaining position. Yeah, it's not under any of the job descriptions.
So you ask a question about the percentage rate increase. It sounds like we're gonna loop back to the discussion of restrooms and maybe this. How many of you are open to seeing this move up? Seeing this percentage rate move up versus having staff look for potential savings elsewhere?
Just the number that Nicholas said for the portlets, that put us at 4.97.
I think that my wiggle room would be the point. I think we very publicly all committed to 5%. I think we should stick with that. And so I think we have 0.15% to play with here in terms of new money.
And the portlets would take.
Yes, right. Included,
the majority of
right,
that.
Right. What I'm saying is I'm comfortable going to 5% even, whether that's a combination of the portlets and the junior planner or however. That's where I am.
Well, it sounds like we're gonna loop back after that conversation, right? So anything else you need from council right now? So,
No, I think that was it.
thanks, Don.
Thank you.
So that takes us to a discussion of our ADA charge for the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Councilor Deering.
Hello. So about a month, no, probably a couple weeks ago at this point, had some discussions during the Jedi B committee regarding giving them a charge for the ADA communications, or what they do for their committee. So what I did was I put together really some kind of generalized, but then more specific towards Barre stuff, really just to kind of start that conversation. I did share that with you guys this afternoon through email, and I read that if we're good with that. Wonderful. The primary charge of the Justice, Equity, Diversion, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee regarding ADA accessibility is to review and address the accessibility needs and the issues that arise in the city of Barre. The committee assists in assuring compliance with the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, ADA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, HHS, and all other pertinent federal, state, and local laws and regulations pertaining to individuals with disabilities. To accomplish this, the committee will assist the ADA compliance officer in the evaluation of current Barre City programs, policies, and procedures regarding to access and services for individuals with disabilities, make recommendations to the city manager and or city council regarding the best methods of dissolving, addressing barriers that inhibit any access to any Barre City services, programs, products, or accommodations. And lastly, assist the city in identifying the priority of issues related to the ADA and assist in prioritizing improvements related to ADA transition planning.
Looks thorough, thank you. Any
What I've
questions?
also done is included, there's 4 links on the copy that I sent to you guys. And those are all just references from policies that I've pulled from different municipalities as well as universities.
Well done. So moved.
Second, and I just have,
There's a motion and a second, Council Wazazak.
for Nicholas, Jeff was the ADA compliance person for a while. Who?
It's Rick.
Rick now, yeah.
Yep.
I figured as much.
Jolyn Mulvaney.
Thank you. I just want to point out, Joella Mulvaney, Barre City. I'm the chair of the JEDIP committee. I just want to point out that the actual ADA rules that we have to comply with, we're just finding out about. And Rick is really advanced in this, way more than I am, certainly, way more than the rest of the committee. But there's really not much we can do at all. I don't want people to think that we're going to run right out and do X, Y, and Z until we find out exactly what it is that we have to do. And this is something that Rick is pursuing. He actually has to get a certification because we need an officer that's certified. And I'm uncomfortable until that certification is established to go forward in any way with committee work, because I don't know that we'll be following the real directives of the program. So I just want to call, while this is well and good, it's kind of looks like a blanket charge. I just don't want people to get the impression or idea that we're going to activate anytime soon.
And Rick has looked at this and
Yes.
is okay. Yeah,
Yep.
great. Well, thank you for that. Also, congrats to Mayor Mulvaney Stanek too. So.
It was quite a night, yes.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right, Councilor Stockwell.
No, I just thought it was already the charge that when the ADA became part of this committee that was already charged with this. But this is fine. Looks good. Sounds great.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
And
Guys have it.
if you could email it to me so I could put it in the minutes. I didn't get
Absolutely,
your
yep.
email, so thanks.
All right, yeah, actually, I don't think this was part of the packet, so
Yeah.
we should probably ratify that next meeting. So that takes us to the charter changes.
That's a clapping. I believe. That is a clap emoji, which is distinct from a raise hand.
So, go ahead,
Yeah,
Carol. You got
you've
it.
got the
Yep.
manager. We have been bouncing some language off of the city attorney and got some responses from him, most notably around the separation of clerk treasurer positions and transitioning the treasurer position to appointed. I wanted David to look at the language that I pulled together from thin air. I wanted some kind of legal guidance along that. And he offered some feedback, some changes. And the other thing is, I had a question about the youth voter language that had not only would 16 and 17-year-olds be able to vote in local elections, but the language said that they could serve on council, and I was concerned about that because Vermont Constitution requires elected officials to take an oath of office, and people under 18 can't take an oath of office. So I wanted some clarification from him with regards to that. So the updated language that got sent around to you today includes the suggestions from David, and his email is also, the email string is also included here. But essentially, the two changes are the removing the language allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to be elected to serve on the council because they cannot take an oath of office. And then some tweaks in the language with regards to, this is the top, yeah, there. Sorry, they're in red, so it's hard to see against the bright purple background. But essentially, it just tweaks the way the language is referenced. It doesn't make any substantive changes. And so I bring these forward. I would like to have council at least informally approve what the language is going to be tonight, so that when I bring you the warning for approval on Thursday of next week, we have the fewest number of changes that need to be incorporated in that document, which will ultimately need to be signed by you all that evening. So I don't know if there's other sections of the language that you want to talk about. Whether you want to confirm that they're all being included. I bring these couple of revisions to you and open it up.
I read through them, I thought they were good.
Do we need a motion?
No,
In
no,
terms
I
of
just,
the-
it's more of a consensus does, you know, I've heard conversations from different people. I support this, I don't support that. I just would like to know what we think we're looking at for next week's warning, that's all.
I say send it all to
In
the
terms of
voters.
what we will support?
Yeah.
I
Well,
will
sorry,
not, I
just
will not support 16 and 17. I
Clarifier,
won't be
just like,
voting.
well, no, clarifier
that.
of support, like, to
It's
send
one-
to the voters?
So the Council
whether or not you
Wozniak's asking the
support-
Oh,
question
okay,
is
well,
like,
that's
would
what
you
she said.
Well,
support
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
sending this to the voters? And are you looking for, should we go through the list or are we saying as a package?
My 2 cents would be send all of this as edited by the attorneys and Carol to the voters.
I've already stated my opinion.
Yeah, I'd be opposed to that, the town meeting day, so.
Okay, so should we just go around and just give the
Well,
clerk?
we haven't had a hearing yet, so I think we need to hear from people. That's the point of the process, is that we're required to have hearings to hear from the people. There really hasn't been much process.
But for her
I've
to have
tried,
it warned.
I've tried to push process for the last 6-8 weeks, but
She's just,
okay.
she's
I tried to create a
asking,
committee.
but she's asking for direction as to whether or not the warning that she puts together has the information on it.
It will, I'll just have to cross things off if they get
Right,
crossed
and
off
what I'm
yeah.
suggesting is that we go around and just give a straw poll on it so that she has an idea, or not, that's fine. You can just cross it off, Carol.
People need to come prepared. If we're not going to do it tonight, people need to come prepared next Thursday to say, to vote yes or no, which sections are going to be on the ballot.
Okay.
I will be voting yes to send all 4 of these things to the ballot.
Right,
That's my straw poll.
so that takes us to upcoming business and a discussion of our meeting schedule. Maybe we could just start, Joellen Mulvaney? Sorry to jump ahead.
I just have a couple of questions. One was, wasn't there something in the charter change that was referring to the composition of committee members?
That was removed, Joe Ellen.
Entire thing?
Yep.
Thank you.
I can add to that. I think it's best done as a policy change, and I think I will do a policy change suggestion, but not at this point in time.
Excuse me, Councilor.
Okay, so under upcoming business, we have a discussion of the council meeting schedule. So there's quite a few on the April list. I think given that we need to meet on the 11th, the idea is that we would not meet on the 9th. Is that?
Well, yeah, Mayor, I think it would just be helpful to get clarity because the 9th could have been one of the housing off-week meetings. So I think it would just be helpful for us to know from a staffing perspective, because what we're looking at specifically for the next couple days, next week in April, and then the next couple of weeks after that, so we can just be prepared.
Pay attention a little.
So,
So the packet included the council's regular meeting schedule for 2024 with red lines. And I've added the Thursday, 11th of April meeting, which is required to conform with statutory requirements for the first hearing on charter changes and also the approval of the town meeting day ballot. It would be good to know whether you're having the housing off week meeting on the 9th as well, and also meeting on Thursday, the 11th. And then are the other off weeks going to continue to be the housing meetings, and that, just so we can plan ahead?
So what other housing items are counselors preparing to put in packets?
Yeah, I think we could bail on the 9th. I mean, the 9th and the 11th are so close. If we did want to, and all we're meeting for really on the 11th, Carol.
I'll take that as a motion to
Yep,
at least not
thank
meet
you.
on the 9th. So there's a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. So that's off the table. Then the question becomes, what about what's coming up at these tentatively scheduled housing meetings that couldn't be accomplished at our regularly scheduled meetings? I know like tonight, we blended housing issues. So.
I mean, legislative updates and an ISEC, you get into housing discussions, you get into policy discussions. Should we be doing, those discussions can sometimes run an hour or two.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
I
if
realize,
nobody has a concrete suggestion, then how about?
well, life happens fast for us.
But we could remove them, and then if someone has a need, we can call one, because you can always call one within.
I mean, you can cancel a meeting last minute. You can't always warn one last minute.
Yeah, I think you can.
If it's an emergency. And I think, well, I hope we all consider housing an emergency.
All right, well, here's what we'll do.
Are we
Here's
doing
what
the
I'll do.
16th? Can we just go down?
Absent any items being submitted, I'll cancel those meetings unless
Fair
there's a
enough.
cover memo that's been presented and you've done your work per our board rules of procedure and you put the item with the cover memo on it.
So 16th we're meeting?
No.
Yes.
No, what I just said is I'm canceling those unless somebody comes with a concrete proposal.
Okay, but what I'm curious about is what are our meetings?
When would you like it?
So the 11th is a meeting, and the 23rd would be a meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the
7th would be a meeting.
I'll just say that I've always been a big fan of meeting weekly and at 7 o'clock, so. But nobody cares, so.
Can we talk about doing abatement hearings before the meeting on the 11th?
Yeah.
I'd like to schedule, like I said, we've got 7 in the hopper right now, 5 of which I believe would qualify for education tax reimbursement from the state, and we have to have, the cutoff is April 15th. We have to have completed all abatements that are going to be applied for at that point in time. So I'd like to get these other 5 in front of you. And that would be the easiest time to do it, because we can do, we can have a quorum of the Board of Abatement if I've got at least 4 of you here, along with either Larry or Carly and myself, so.
The question is 5 PM on Thursday, April 11th, right?
Yep.
We could do, I think we could do 5:15. There's 5 of them, and presentation plus deliberative session. Does that, for those who, yeah, I know that, I know it's not good for you, so, yeah, okay.
Good materials, Carol?
Some of
5.
them,
Oh.
that's kind of.
Always a consideration.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we're gonna meet at 5:15 on Thursday, April 11th.
I
prior
actually
to our
might be
regular
able to make that one.
All right, so that takes us to roundtable. I'll start with.
Well, no, we missed,
We didn't miss the ARPA item.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was totally my
Make a
overlook.
motion to, of disposition, just removing the ARPA
Second.
stuff.
So to approve.
Dispose of it. I hate to dispose of it, but.
Second.
All right, so there's a motion and a second.
Not
Is there any further
dispose, but-
discussion? Do you have discussion, Councilor Booton?
Yeah, clarification on, it's not, I'm disposing of the ARPA community. And Carol, can you just like figure something nice and wordy to make it go away?
All right, so we have a
Move
motion
to close the ARPA Community Innovation Fund and direct the manager to notify applicants that no projects will be funded
That
under this program.
was exactly my motion.
You mean like it says in the memo there?
Yes.
As written in the memo.
I wasn't
So
looking
there's a
at the
motion
memo.
and a second.
Shows.
No further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. Motion carries. So that takes us to roundtable. Councilor Wozniak.
You're not going to do upcoming?
We did that.
Business?
We did sort of.
Oh, yeah, we did. I guess we didn't talk
Yeah,
about what's actually coming up.
You
so.
can defer whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of going to be just wrapping up budget for the ballot, and potentially some updates on buyouts, is depending on how quickly we get information back. I know, depend on.
Do you have a sense of timelines?
Yes and no. I mean, we've contacted the 17 or so properties that have been contacted for the first round of buyouts. What our FEMA consultants through the state have said is to expect a couple of months before an offer is made. 3 months possibly is what they're suggesting from their experience, and then a couple of months, maybe 2 months from that for a close for any offers that are any buyouts that go to a close.
It actually doesn't sound that bad, but I must be missing something.
Yeah, I think that's probably for some of the tougher ones, like the clearer ones. And that's their estimate. I think this is the experience that they're telling us from their experiences in other states and with other processes. So, but yeah, we have 17 with VEM now. Of the 17 that we've given them, and Janet's been really handling this on the city side. We have gotten some feedback from them that immediately some of them are eligible for the Swift Current, which is helpful. That those will move more quickly. And then we've also gotten some feedback that some of them probably not so much. So it depends. I know it's not a great answer, but.
Any other upcoming items?
I'd like to have Sultana Khan invited to a council meeting. She's doing a lot of prevention work, and I know that we have some very serious addiction issues across the state. And so I think her research is good. She's doing the work that was the prevention work with youth years ago. It was the old New Directions grant.
Good suggestion. That reminds me, it'd be good to touch base with Bob at Turning Point. I haven't heard about that project in a while. Not that it needs to be an agenda item, but just curious to see how that's going. So.
I'm also wondering, can we get data about how many police calls and how many incidents there are?
Yes.
Because I know there's impressions about crime, but I don't know what the data is. So it's like hard to say, gosh, yeah, it's really increasing or it's really decreasing. I just don't know. I don't have the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have the chief prepare something.
All right. There are no other upcoming items. That officially takes us to roundtable. So that takes us to, I'll start with Councilor Wazazek.
Pass.
Councilor Bruton.
So I'm gonna state something sad happened, but kind of happy for them, but sad that Stephanie and Jeff had retired this weekend. I got to see Stephanie and I talked to Jeff last week, and he was pretty stoked about retiring. And it was nice to see Stephanie up at the egg hunt. And I just want to say a big thank you to both of them. They've been really great since I've been on city council. And I just want to say thank you to both of them. If they're listening, they're probably not listening, but I put it out into the ethosphere.
And maybe so I can go in the minutes. I'm just, for Jeff specifically, I'm glad that he'll be able to work on his baseball swing now. So Carol, if that could go in the minutes, I'll mail that to him.
Yes.
Councilor Stockwell.
I've heard from a couple of people about the conditions of the road, but I really feel, having driven on the roads, that there are some really bad roads, but basically we're doing really well for what we've been through. And look forward to more paving. Makes people so happy. And I pass.
Councilor Shambell.
Yes.
Councilor Lozon.
Thank you. Appreciate the support on the legislative issues. You know, they're important. It's important that we have as many tools in our toolbox as we can. You know, just been looking about sort of the state of the city, where we really are. And even though I'm proud of people, how far they've come, we have a long way to go. And this is going to be, you know, sometimes people will look at me and say, well, you did this in 2011 and you did it in 2015. No, I didn't. It was nothing like this. There was a lot of mud and a lot of water, but there wasn't the volume of mud and water that we saw in 2023. So every time I look at these issues, it occurs to me that we're going to need, I keep saying it, I sound like a broken record, we're going to need that competitive advantage, or we're never going to be able to build back the Grand List and build it back stronger. So thanks.
Councilor Deering.
I've started knocking on doors lately, talking to people, and the biggest thing that I hear about, as we all know, is housing. And people want to know, what we're doing to put people back in our community, to raise that awareness. So just glad to see that we're doing those things, that we're bringing the housing to the forefront. And I know that it's going to continue to be an issue, that people want to bring more people within our community so we can fill jobs and also stimulate our economy. So I think that we're working on some really great stuff.
And I'll close this out with just saying that I finished my annual report submission where I remembered the Pave Me Now proposal, and would reiterate that I hope we can continue to make those capital investments in paving, but wastewater treatment plant first, right?
Yep.
All right. With that, I'll close, and that takes us to adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it.
When are we going to Google?